To confirm as a council, we welcome the use of the Welsh language within our public meetings. I have not received notice that members or invited attendees wish to use Welsh today. Therefore, the meeting will be conducted in English only. May I remind you that this meeting is being webcast. Therefore, can I ask that you turn off or silence your mobile phones and ensure you speak clearly into your microphones. For your information, there are no planned fire drills today, but in case of a fire alarm sounding, please follow the signs to exit the buildings. Can I also remind members to sign the attendance register and confirm if any apologies have been received for this meeting? And we've got the list of apologies. Rachel, do you want to?
Yes, we have apologies from Councillor Giles Davis and Gwyn Smith.
Thank you.
Add in there. If I can also add in, Alan Williams was hoping to be here, but he's been caught up. He may be late, but if not, he sends his apologies.
Okay, thank you. Okay, if we move on to item 2 on the agenda, declarations of interest. Could I ask if any members should have any declarations of interest that they declare them now? And Tim is here from legal to give any advice if required.
Thank you, Chair. Any issues, members? I'm not anticipating any.
No.
Thank you, Chair. Just to remind members, if any do arise later on, then they should record those in the register, but I don't anticipate there'll be any. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tim. I don't think you need to stay for the rest of the meeting now. Thank you very much. Okay, so we move on to item 3 on the agenda, the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of November 2017. Please, could I ask members to scan through the minutes for accuracy and confirm that the minutes are an accurate account of the meeting? Seconded? Okay. The next item then is action sheet. Rachel, please, could Rachel update members of any actions outstanding?
The action sheets for noting all actions have been completed. Okay. And then item 5 is preparation of Torvain's tree strategy. We're going to invite Bill Purvis.
Rachel's going to go.
Just wait for Bill to arrive. Yeah.
His role and the involvement in this.
Yeah, I'll just read
is relevant.
Leader. Hello. Okay. Right. So we have. Well, I'd like to welcome Bill Purvis from Natural Resources Wales, who's here today to provide us with some information. Bill, you've been sent details of the information that the committee would like from you, including what we'd be interested in is a brief overview of your role and how it is relevant to this report. So, if you would like to start and give us the overview. Yeah, I'll turn my.
Thank you. Well, I'm happy to take questions as I go along. You don't need to wait till the end, however it's convenient. But I'm Bill Purvis. I'm the Natural Resources Planning Manager for South Wales, and I'm here today because the role I fulfil in NRW is one of looking at the natural resources of Wales. We all do in NRW. NRW was recently formed 5 years ago nearly by Welsh Government, combining Forestry Commission of Wales, CCW, Countryside Council for Wales, and Environment Agency Wales. So it's an environmental organisation which provides a champion role for the environment in Wales on behalf of Welsh Government. And one of the new purposes that we have under the Environment Act is to look at some of the sustainable approaches to looking at Wales' natural resources. We haven't had a great track record over the last few decades, not just in Wales. And So Welsh Government has put in recent legislation on the Environment Act, which gives NRW a new purpose, a purpose to look at how well we are managing Wales' natural resources, both now and for the future. Importantly, it also recognises that natural resources have multiple benefits. This is not just about protecting natural resources at all costs. This is about looking at the value that natural resources provide to society, to us as citizens of Wales, recognising that we can use natural resources, and we do. They provide us with food and clean drinking water, climate change mitigation, all kinds of stuff. But we need to make sure that we're doing that in a way that doesn't compromise those same services being provided to our children and grandchildren. So taking long-term approaches are really, really important, looking to prevent problems if we can, but also recognising that there's a balance to be had between the needs of society and the needs of the environment. So that's the kind of challenge, if you like, for us. So that's in general terms. One more point. The Environment Act asked NRW to produce a State of Natural Resources report, which we produced a year and a half ago. And what that did was looked at the Wales natural resources across Wales and said, okay, this is the natural resources. What state are they in? How are they being used at the moment? What's good about them? Where are the pressures? Where are the problems? We provided that report back to Welsh Government, and Welsh Government took that and said, right, if that's what the environment is telling us, what are the priorities for Wales? And they laid down those priorities in their natural resources policy, which was issued in September. That had some key high-level messages for what Wales needs to do better in terms of protecting and preserving its natural resources. One of those elements is about natural solutions, and trees are a crucial element of that, so bringing it a bit closer to trees. The reason I'm here really is that one of the main products we will do in response to getting that policy from Welsh Government saying, this is what we need to do, these are the priorities. They've said, NRW, we would like you to produce for 6 parts of Wales an area statement for each part of Wales. An area statement will be an engagement-led process. It will produce a vision for that area. It will look at who's collaborating in protecting and preserving the natural resources of that area, and how can we work together collaboratively to improve them. So there will be an area statement produced for Gwent. Gwent is one of those areas. That's why I'm particularly interested in here today. The other thing about me that you need to know is I'm NRW's representative on Torfaen's Public Services Board. I'm on the executive for that. I represent NRW on that board. And we've been doing a lot of work on the wellbeing assessment and the draft wellbeing plan at the moment. And I hope you'll be aware that one of the objectives of the wellbeing plan is to get an integrated strategy to look at the green infrastructure and the networks in Torfaen, recognising how important that is. And of course, trees play a vital role in that. So that brings it back to, Jem, to why I'm particularly interested in this. And I've been working with my colleagues have been working with Torfaen's colleagues to look at how we can best develop a green infrastructure strategy for Torfaen, not just for the local authority, but for the other members of the PSB and ultimately wider groups, including ultimately, I hope, business and commercial interests who would also like to be involved.
We were just come in there. In terms of the Public Service Board, we had a pre-meeting this morning and we were discussing, we're going to develop this new tree policy for Torfaen. Will this new infrastructure in the wellbeing plan, do you think you'll get buy-in from all the Public Service Board members to the new tree policy?
Yes, I do, and I'll tell you why. Because those members have been fully collaborating with developing the objectives that are within the wellbeing plan. So they're well aware of it. We've had discussions about the assets that those various partners bring, the Health Board and local authority and ourselves. So yes, I would expect this, what we're suggesting here, the strategy here for trees, is, if you like, a manifestation of how that objective might well be delivered. So I think, yes, so that's what I would expect. So, you know, just going back to trees, they're really important. They've always been seen as important. I think sometimes that they've been seen as something that needs to be managed because of the impact they have on the costs they bring about for local authorities, in particular in terms of management, you know, liability costs associated with them, which is still something that we are going to have to consider. The tree strategy is going to have to recognise that trees grow. Sometimes they grow in the wrong place, they cause problems, and we still need to manage them for public safety purposes and other things. But I think the balance, we have to look at the balance and shifting the balance, recognising that maybe there are more benefits that trees provide that we've currently, up until now, sort of undervalued. And the best way to do that really is to take a longer term, broader approach, and that's what's advocated here. It's a strategic approach, which is a word that's used a lot. But the benefits I see is it's looking at, in the round, who's involved in managing trees, not just within the council, but also, as you said, within partners who also have an interest in Torvine. What's involved in managing trees? What do they need to do? And how can we take a longer term view? So if we're thinking about where trees are, or where there aren't enough at the moment, we need more trees, but we need to make sure they're in the right place. Make sure that if we are planting trees, we're planting them in a place that provides the biggest bang for our buck on that. And, you know, they provide a whole series of natural resources, and that's what the iTree study tries to show. The iTree study looked at Torvine as one of a number of local authorities in Wales, and it looked at mapping the urban trees. And it showed actually Torvine is relatively green in comparison to other local authorities in Wales. All three urban centres in Torvine are slightly greener in terms of trees than the average in Wales, which is good. That's a good sign. It still means it still could be better, and also it also showed that the evidence suggests that the greenness, or how many trees there are, have reduced in the last 4 years, the 4 years prior to this survey. So we've got fewer trees than we had before. So that's not good. So we need to, yeah.
Could you tell me why the trees are reducing? Is that pollution? Is that are people taking trees out? What? I noticed that in the report.
I don't know the detail of why. I suspect it's because that we got the. You know, trees need to be controlled. We've already said they grow, they're in the wrong place sometimes, and we do have to manage trees. And that's not going to change. I think possibly what's not been happening is there hasn't been enough proactive tree replacement for those trees that have been taken out. And I think that's the strategy deals with that and says we probably need to look at a plan to replace trees that we take out that have to be taken out for very valid reasons. Yeah, I don't know of any. That's my understanding.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Bill. One of my concerns, and you just mentioned about the management of trees have to be taken out, and I live in an area where there is a community forestry controlled by yourselves. A large swathe of trees has been taken out, but there's no communication with the actual community of what's going to be taking place after the trees have been taken out. Have you thought about this going forward?
Well, one of the things I like about the strategy is that it's been, as far as it's got at the moment, there's been a lot of engagement. It's all been within Torvine, but they have been talking to the various people. Engagement that the strategy will then need to be engaged with wider, so that communities understand what we're trying to do. What you're talking about there is a local matter, and that does, you know, communities are vital, and NRW is committed to making our woodlands more accessible, and that's one of the reasons why we're really pleased to sign up to the wellbeing objective, the objective 1 in the wellbeing in the wellbeing plan, which says we need to make more use of our assets. We need a green infrastructure, and there's of course also the benefits that are brought about for that from commerce, green jobs, training, etc. You know, there are other benefits that people get from access to our woodland estate. So, I mean, I'm happy to. That sounds like a local issue, which I be quite happy to pick up. But the strategy will need to involve communities. That's the whole point. I think one of the questions that Catherine asked me about was how does the strategy kind of help with Wellbeing and Future Generations Act? And I think the engagement around it, having a plan, something that we can talk to communities about, is meeting some of the requirements of the Wellbeing Act to bring communities on board and feel they have some ownership of the kind of longer term view for where they live.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. My question relates to a point that you touched upon, being the economic benefit of having trees across the borough. How is the economic benefit of a tree or a forest measured and reported on?
There are some assumptions, and the iTree study does include some assumptions about the value of the tree. It has. And those are related to things like the liability, the cost of damage that might be caused by the tree, maintenance costs of the tree, plus an understanding of the less tangible benefits of a tree. The specimen trees are, you know, they're iconic in some ways, and people like to see trees. There have been some assessments done looking at things like flood mitigation, so that we can look at infiltration. So when it rains, if there's tree cover, rain goes into the ground rather than running off into sewers, and you can provide some costing for that in terms of clean-up costs and those kind of things. It's not an exact science, and it's a challenge for natural resources. It's, you know, not everything is costable. Was there more detail behind the question that I've missed?
No, I picked up the question from your report, where you've got one of the benefits of where you need to be going forward. So your current state says the trees have no monetary or economic value, whereas the future state is the value is recognised. So my query was, well, how do we measure success against that metric?
Yeah. I think it is to do with trying to get some understanding of avoided costs, really. I think because at the moment they've just been seen as a burden, and they do provide benefits.
I think from what you're saying, it's more of a risk mitigation strategy as opposed to an economic multiplier or economic benefit for the borough.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's right. Was there? I'm trying to think the other questions that Catherine wanted me to bring out. I think just from NRW's point of view, this is the right thing to do. It's getting all the people with a vested interest in managing the trees better together, talking, engaging around it, and saying, well, if this is what we're going to do, how can you help us? And things like flood risk is a classic. So there's an example in Grangetown, in Cardiff, Greener Grangetown, where which is a partnership between the local authority, NRW have been involved, but also, more importantly, the water company, looking at mitigating surface water flooding there and trying to prevent. What happened in the past was it rained, a lot of gullies took the water straight into surface water sewers, which often surcharged, caused local flooding. So what they've tried to do there is look at measures to intercept that water better. Trees are a good example of that. There are other ways, but trees are one way of doing that by allowing water to infiltrate quicker into subsoil rather than going in, being taken off the streets and piped away. So, that's one example, I think, of where we'd need to see if we looked at trees a bit more strategically, and we said, well, we've got to increase the number of trees that we have. Where would be best to plant them? So
Chair's privilege. You've mentioned a few times management of trees. Now, one of the issues we've discussed as a committee, and we're going to raise this with the Torfaen officers, is that small community groups have great difficulty in funding maintenance of trees. Now, is there anything that your organisation can do to help with that? I mean, we're thinking of allotment groups, sports and social organisations. Small organisations struggle, particularly in the current financial climate. Does
your organisation help with that in any way, or can you?
There are examples of where we do that, Chair. On our estate, we do allow community asset transfer, which basically means we do allow communities to run and to manage our woodlands, and we have tried to support a number of groups with that. I have to say our focus has been on the therapeutic value of managing trees. We've spent quite a lot of time on getting disadvantaged communities and other groups of individuals to get involved with managing trees to help, for example, mental well-being as a kind of so we have supported those kind of projects. We do run a grants programme which community groups would be entitled to to take part in. And as I've said, trees and the management of trees are important to us, so we would see that as a possibility through the PSB as well. So to answer your question, we're not doing enough of it. We've started to do it on our assets, and if it's not on land that we manage on behalf of the people of Wales, then it would be through our grant funding kind of role.
I was very interested in what you said about the Grangetown thing, because I actually rode round Grangetown the last time I was a community worker years ago when they had the famous flood down there. So that's actually quite close to home. My question was really along the lines of Councillor Evans said about the woods coming up, which was your responsibility. We've done the community woodlands down in Cwmbran as well. Having taken lots of trees out, but there's lots of questions about, and obviously you're the major policy tree people in Wales, about how we replace trees that we've taken out. I mean, Blaenbran, Lascar and people like that, where we take trees out, how we put them back in. I mean, part of this policy is to grow trees, and obviously we've got developers putting in estates, which is more than trees, it's hedges as well, and the whole aspect of how we manage and replace trees. I mean, we've got the canal, we've got cycleways, all that stuff in there, some of which are your other responsibility. Obviously, how we manage, replace and mitigate flood risk, water runoff, the rest of it. How we integrate all that is a major aspect of this, yes, and how we maintain it. I mean, can you elucidate on things like pollution as well come into this as well, don't they?
They do, and that's why having a strategy. I think one of the elements of the strategy is for it to be communicated and hopefully engaged with the rest of the partners, so that we would have that option to say, well, for Cwmbran, where do we see, and it's not just down to us, but where would we see the maximum gain of planting trees? And we'd probably bring that to the party for a negotiation about where other people would say, well, actually, you might want them there, but we can see a benefit in putting them somewhere else. So we'd have a conversation about where to plant trees to get the best benefit. Because you're right, runoff, it's not just about the volume of water, the quality of water is also improved by flowing through vegetation, and trees are crucial to that as well. So I think I hope the policy would drive a kind of conversation to give us a plan for the whole of Torfaen, to say, well, we've got to replace trees that we're losing. We want to up our cover. Where's the best place to put them? And if we where will we get the best value from them? Where will we mitigate the risk most effectively by planting trees?
Do you have enough support on the science and the planning to do that? Because obviously the borough's at the moment going backwards in terms of resources. You still have that sort of resource, don't you?
Yeah, we have people. I mean we're not flushed with resource either. We're struggling as well. But this is why it's helpful to us to have a strategy. It's helpful to us to have something that we can go back to. I can go back to my senior managers and say, we'd like to support this because, and here's why we'd like to do it, and that's why it's a priority. So we might be able to divert some of our finite resource into that. That's another attractive element for us of having something to hang that on.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Bill, you mentioned earlier that NRW was trying to make the forestries more accessible. In this particular area, mountain biking is very popular. Extremely popular, I would say, up at Trepentris. I don't know if you know about what's gone on up there, or... Well, basically, like I said, the mountain biking scene is quite large here. Up at Trepentris, certain trail building crews have cleared quite a bit of the forestry up there. I'm just interested to know what you guys have been doing about that sort of thing.
That's our estate, is it? That's the estate we manage. Yes, we would seek to take action there if we can. Not always easy. It's a balance, again, mountain biking in the right place is a good thing to do. It's a question of balancing that. I don't know that particular area, but I do know that if we don't manage mountain bike trails properly, then they're a headache for us. In the same way as trees are a liability for the local authority, I mean, uncontrolled mountain biking is a liability because we have a health and safety responsibility for those people, even people who are on our land without our permission, if you like. So it is something we take seriously, and we will respond to when we're confronted with people who are doing things illegally on our land. I think we have to recognise that maybe some of the reason why that is happening is because maybe our estate isn't as porous, isn't as open to mountain bikers as maybe it should in all areas, and I think we need to think a little bit about how we can provide some incentive for mountain biking to maybe provide the carrot rather than the stick. So I think that's something that we are looking at as well. But again, it's another specific issue. If there are particular concerns about NRW's response to what's going on up there, which is causing problems for partners, then please let me know, and I'll find out about it.
Yeah, Bill, thanks for that. I mean, it's interesting that NRW is actively seeking, are interested in the mountain biking scene, because obviously it is like you said, it's vastly popular. And it is. I think the community will broadly would probably benefit from knowing that you guys are actually seeking to assist the mountain bike scene in gaining access to your forestry. So I think that's a really good thing.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks, Bill, for the presentation so far. I'd like to ask, obviously, we are under pressure here, as all local authorities are, for building more housing, and that's obviously in competition with, open spaces and parkland and trees. The question I wanted to ask was, does NRW have they issued guidelines to planning committees to determine that certain percentages of new developments need to incorporate open space, green space, numbers of trees, that sort of thing? Is there any guidelines or anything being published in that respect?
I need to check on that. That's not my area of strength. I'd like to think we have a voice in that kind of area, but of course that is we are in planning, town and country planning terms. We're a statutory advisor on things like flood risk, and also we would be very concerned about designated sites or protected species of animals, which of course are adversely affected by the loss of trees. So we would have a role there, and there'll be strong guidance there. I'm not sure that we have that kind of more general guidance around best practice on planting, things like that. We would certainly support, and again I think part of the suggestion for this strategy is that it would inform supplementary planning guidance, and we'd be more than welcome to contribute to that, to see how we can make sure that in agreeing to the necessary development that has to take place, that we're making we're not, doing it in a way that's unsustainable for trees. And I think this is one of the challenges of natural resources. It's this trade-off, it's this balance, it's a negotiation. Not all trees are the same. And if we are losing trees, because, if people, development is needed. We need places for people to live. We need people to earn money we understand that. I guess the thing is, if that's happening, if we can't avoid the impact on trees, how do we best mitigate it? And I think supplementary planning guidance, as advised in this, would be a way of, really helping.
Thank you.
And sorry, just to say if we could look more, this also gives us the opportunity to look more strategically. And sometimes with planning application, you say, well, you want to put it there, so we'll plant some trees right here. I think we need to start thinking about where, at a borough level, we might see where's the best place to mitigate, rather than thinking it has to be adjacent to the site that's being developed, for example.
Thank you.
You just raised a very interesting question there, because it's another discussion we had earlier. Not all trees are the same. I estimated that Cwmbran probably has 100,000, roughly, Thailandii. And you're looking, and I raised the question about the Newtown's cherry tree crop, which is probably all failing at the moment. Every time we go round in May, which is for a significant time, they've been in there, 50, 60 years, and they're probably all going to go about the same time, a bit like apple trees do and things like that. Well, that's such an interesting question you've raised there. Is there an RW view on these species? There's got to be, isn't there, because you've said about them.
Well, yes, there is. I mean, obviously, native planting, we would support that. And again, that's another element of the tree strategy, which is to look at appropriate trees planted. And yes, you're right. Around that, that's the other thing the strategy has to address, is the long-term management and understanding at even age. If you plant all the trees at the same time, all the problems arise at the same time. And having a longer-term view about how you manage trees into the future, so you get uneven age canopies and things like that can help. And as you say, managing trees actively, as needs to happen on lots of local nature reserves, where you can't have trees. If we're managing a reserve, an important grassland habitat, or then you don't need trees encroaching on that. It's not what you need. So not all trees are the same.
You ever started with hedges?
Oh, they're good. No, mostly.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to the report again, you've got a movement from the current state of how trees are managed in terms of boundaries to a future state where boundaries are removed and trees are seen as a continuous resource. What's your view on how individuals, private property owners, social housing landlords are responsible for the trees that more or less sit on their parcels of land?
Yeah, I mean, it's harder to do in that with an indirect role. I think the way to do it is for there to be some reward. If that doesn't have to always be a financial reward, but I think it has to be an understanding of the benefits that managing those trees better will bring to those landowners. With the social landlords, I mean, they've been quite active in the PSB, and we've been having conversations with them about, and in principle, they are very, very keen to see how they can maximise their contribution to the green infrastructure. But where it's indirect, it is a question of education and trying to demonstrate the benefits of trees, rather than and being flexible. About where there are issues and challenges that people face, trees in the wrong place, that we're sympathetic with that, but they understand that in order to mitigate that, you need to plant a tree somewhere else, or 2 trees somewhere else.
Yeah, just to follow up, we were told a couple of tales this morning of where social housing landlords have responsibility for current trees but aren't maintaining them in the manner they should be, which leads then to falls, private property damage, etc. My fear would be, if we tell them that the boundaries are then removed and they're no longer responsible for the maintenance of the trees on their land, that nobody would look after that work. It would just be bounced back and forth between various agencies. So I would like to see some kind of ownership on each of the
I must confess I hadn't realised that was a consequence of this. The PSB well-being, the approaches we're taking are all about people, communities taking ownership, and so yeah, if you want people to manage the resource, they need to feel they are responsible, accountable.
There are issues sometimes with your agency regard the river. I mean, specific examples being allotment grounds next to rivers where you've got riparian, I can never say the word riparian ownership, and then we have issues with our authority, the allotments and RW with regard to who's responsible, and that can get quite heated at times. And they're very big trees, some of them. I've actually witnessed one falling myself, and it ends up quite often with the trees floating down the river. And where we go with that sometimes is tricky.
That's a really good example, because that's an area where at the moment, whatever it done, everyone throws their hands up and waits for something horrible to happen. And then if the river falls, if it falls in the river and floats downstream and blocks a bridge, we'll pick it out, we'll take it out, because it's going to cause flooding. So, but if it doesn't cause flooding, we won't take it out. Because, so it is a question of much more a long-term approach, saying how are we going to manage riparian trees so that we can maybe prevent them getting oversized, overage, look at the erosion risk, and work together, because otherwise someone has to carry the can. It's the same point that was made earlier there about things being left and then someone having always. It's a bit like a game of poker, isn't it? Someone has to blink at some stage. So there's a vested interest in the NRW, I think, having those conversations about a much more collaborative approach to managing riparian trees.
It does lead to a question that if those trees are taken out in a timely manner, there's a dirty great load of timber there which somebody can make a profit out, which somewhat mitigates it. So if it's done properly, nobody gets a tree falling down on them. There's some sort of profitability coming. That just begs that question, doesn't it?
Yeah. That's a resource that should be.
Yeah.
I'll just let Bill now make some final remarks, and then any burning questions, because we've got quite a heavy agenda here.
Sure. I mean, I think that the first question that was asked of me was, do we support the strategy? I hope you got from my response that yes, we do. We think it's the right thing to do to involve all people who've got a vested interest in Torvine's trees, to get together to think about how we look after them in the long term, how we think about some of the challenges of managing and balancing the liabilities and the risks that trees cause with the benefits they cause. And the best way to do that is to have a well-communicated plan that's agreed and signed up to by a number of people. I think with the well-being plan and the wellbeing objective in there, the objective 1 in the wellbeing plan, that provides the tie-in for those members of the PSB to say, yes, we are committed, we are keen to do this, we'll play our part. The detail of what that actually looks like will have to be negotiated, and we can't do everything everywhere, but I think if we start thinking of trees in the long term, they're a long-term asset, and they need to be managed accordingly. And if we can start doing that by those public sector organisations working together, I think we can then spread that out to involving private sector, whether that be through town and country planning or or corporate social responsibility of those large commercial industries we have in Torvine. So that's why we support it, because it's actually thinking longer term and will benefit the communities of Torvine.
That's been very helpful, Bill. Is there any other? From our perspective, Bill, we've got to come up with recommendations later today. I was particularly interested in the Public Service Board and the wellbeing plans, and I'm sure as a committee we'll discuss that after the meeting today in terms of our recommendations. I was also very interested in the issue about, for the smaller allotment groups, etc., that you have a grant scheme. That's something that maybe we ought to try and publicise better.
Okay. Yes. Well, that's a responsibility on us. I was
thinking more of the council as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there will be. We have communicated that with officers in Torvine. Yeah. So please. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Bill. It was a very helpful presentation. We're very grateful.
Thank you very much, everyone. Cheers.
Okay. Can I just welcome the officers, and can I ask you to introduce yourselves in case there's anyone here who don't know who you are? Please start with.
So I'm Kath Thompson, Assistant Chief Officer for Economy and Environment.
I'm Andrew Osborne.
Mike's.
Yeah, sorry, Chris.
I'm Andrew Osborne, so I'm Group Leader for Environment and Street Scene Services.
I'm Steve Williams, Team Leader for Ecology.
Okay. Just before we invite you to give us a brief overview of the report, two of the councillors, one has got to leave 2:30 and one is going to leave at 3, so they're not being rude. They've got predetermined appointments, but there'll be still plenty of us here to ask questions. So, sorry. Can I invite the officers to provide a brief overview of the main points within the report, please?
Okay, thank you, Chair. The purpose of the report and the appended issues paper in front of you today is to introduce a discussion around the merits of producing an overarching tree strategy for Torfaen. There's an increasing body of evidence about the benefits and ecosystem services provided by trees and woodlands. These include solar shading in the urban environment, slowing surface water runoff. They provide a sense of place and support attractive townscapes. They support biodiversity and enhance biodiversity. Trees can help increase property values, and there's even some evidence to suggest that children living in areas with more street trees have a lower prevalence to asthma. A recent study by NRW, Natural Resources Wales, has suggested that Torfaen has an urban tree canopy cover of around 23% and is the largest canopied local authority in Wales. Street trees, parkland and other green infrastructure elements were important components in the planning of Cwmbran Newtown. So how does the Council influence the tree canopy resource? We have an existing tree policy that is mainly a street scene operational document. Much of this remains fit for purpose as an approach to managing tree risk. However, other council teams and departments make day-to-day decisions about trees. These include the land use planning process, council's environment team, because we manage LNRs, local nature reserves, public rights of ways and cycleways. Schools, highways departments and other departments in the council all influence the management of trees. It's fair to say that a lot of my engagement, particularly with planning in recent times, is in relation to trees, woodlands and hedgerows, and particularly buffer zones and how close a development can go to trees. This report and issues paper seeks to tease out some of the key areas that should be addressed in any decision to draft a Torfaen tree strategy, such as the availability of council land for connective tree planting schemes, should we have a tree replacement policy, and development guidance around woodland and tree buffer zones to support the planning process. Any new strategy must apply the public body's duties under the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and the Environment Wales Act. Nonetheless, the local authority also has other legislative obligations around trees embedded within the Highways Act, the Planning Act and so on. So the proposal to prepare a draft tree strategy for Torfaen for public consultation is subject to the recommendations of this committee today. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for that. That was helpful. What we did this morning, we had a pre-meeting, and we've obviously gone through your issues paper. You've very helpfully put a number of discussion points that you wanted us to look at. So the way we'll play this afternoon now is we've got one or two little general questions to start, and then we'll go through those discussion points. So we'll kick off with a general point, and I'll call on Stuart to ask the first question, please.
Little, that's a good one. I would be interested to know, since our last meeting on this subject, what's being carried out and what inspection regime is now in place. Can you predict how much money has been saved and accidents prevented by implementing a better maintenance and inspection regime?
During the last few years, under the street scene arrangements, there's been a tree inspection programme undertaken, and there's been an electronic record established of the condition of trees using a system called Easy Tree, which street scene have been implementing. And the idea is that those trees now are inspected on a 5-year programme. In terms of your question, the other question was about costs. I'll have to come back to you on that information. I haven't got that to hand.
Go on.
Thank you, Chair. It's in relation to what you just said, Andrew, and regarding the survey of the trees, and it's proposed to do them on a 5-year programme now. When is this programme going to start?
Well, the programme has started, Councillor. The first survey has already been done, so it is ongoing now.
Sorry, if I could be more specific. The last survey was done when? 2016. That's the information I wanted. Thank you.
Yeah, if I remember rightly, the numbers were quite impressive. I think we had something around the region of 3,000-4,000, and Bronavon had something around the region of 5,000. How many of those have we crunched in terms of numbers?
How many have we got, sorry?
If I remember the last survey, I think we had around that number, and then Bronavon had quite a considerable number in their estate, and I just wondered what we'd looked at in terms of trees, because I remember seeing the ward maps on it. It's still on the, if you look on and I know it had been done in practical. I think trees that needed urgent attention, and then trees that weren't so urgent and we knew were there. I mean, if you look in everybody's ward, says there's a priority list there. Has that been gone through, and what's the outcome of that?
Well, as I understand it, the highest priority trees have been dealt with in terms of, dealing with health and safety issues. We'd have to check on the progress, really, so we could come back to you with a progress report on that.
I mean, all I will say was that was quite a considerable amount of work. I remember very, very useful from a ward point of view, and a profile, but I'd be interested to see what the progress on that was. Certainly, thank you.
The second general point was on page 27 of your report. You talk about how you define trees in their broadest context. Does this include trees on private land?
I think generally any proposal for an updated tree strategy for the council will be primarily a local authority document. However, we can't look at the trees in Torvine collectively if we don't have one eye on trees which are on private land. And I'm thinking in particular about issues such as TPOs, which are obviously placed by the planning department on land which is not under the control of the council.
Put my mic on. We move on now to discussion point 1, which is on page 33, bottom of page 33. This morning we had quite a lengthy discussion about tree and ward issues that we deal with as councillors. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on ward issues or we'll be here all afternoon. However, what the sort of consensus that came out of our discussions was, in relation to the current policy, and obviously will affect the future policy, is there a written criteria that the tree officer uses to make a decision on pruning or felling? Now, the context of this was, we all get constituents complaining to us about that, and this included in the report various things like shading, like damage to property, etc. So, and obviously we're not tree experts. Phil Grimes is your tree expert, and he knows a lot more about it than us. But we get frustrated sometimes. So I don't want to pick on particular wards, but what's the criteria, particularly around dangerous, in the current policy?
Well, there is clear guidance insofar as we've got this existing policy document, but I think the purpose of the revised document is perhaps to be a bit more explicit about these things, and so as the public and members and officers are absolutely clear on what the policy is. And you quite rightly point out that if there are health and safety issues, then work is required. But when it comes to issues about trees being close to a garden, or overhanging branches, or light issues, or satellite signal problems, then those are not really issues that would justify the removal of a tree. Albeit, saying that, if a branch is overhanging somebody's property, then they're entitled to cut that off if they wanted to. But I don't think it's for the council to be removing trees for all sorts of reasons other than health and safety. Otherwise, we'd be taking an awful lot of trees down.
Chair, it's in the same context really as the general inquiry, really, Andrew. We all know Phil Grimes. I think we all know Phil Grimes. But Phil isn't the only arboriculturist, is he? I think there are others. Can you give us more information? How many does he have?
He's our only arboriculturist.
Just as backup then from the rest of the staff. So he's our only arborist.
Qualified.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, we'd love loads more, wouldn't we? But we're in those sort of austerity times where it's difficult. However, we are currently in talks with Bronavon, who also have a treaty, and I think there is scope for some sort of joint work in there.
I know in a minute. We'll come on to Bronavon in a minute on the same issue.
The astounding thing is that we've got this huge tree cover, and the question just raised here about if Phil's off, what do we do? We also had a question in NRW, which I thought was an interesting one, about desirable species, which is a slightly different question, but it does raise the question about marking the trees up and what they are. We know, for instance, I've estimated, I might be wrong, Steve might question this, 100,000 Leilandi, for instance, and what they do, and then we've got all the cherry trees that might be, marking out particular trees that might be at risk. That's a possibility, isn't it? It's not saying they're going to fall down, it's saying it's desirable, undesirable, and you've got hedges and all the rest of it. So there's some probability going on here as well, which might save Phil a bit of work, because we know we've got other people on the council that do this sort of thing as well. So I'm just wondering if there's a way we save ourselves a bit of work on some of this, and also look at desirability when we need to replace the things as well, because there's a replacement in this discussion as well. It's not just about single trees.
Yes, no, I absolutely agree. I mean, he is the only agriculture, so he's the only one that's going to be able to say, cut it down or not. Having said that, there is a qualification where we can get some of the street scene operatives to take that qualification, where they can go and assess it at least. They couldn't make the decision, but they could actually come back and say to Phil, well, this tree looks ABC, it's unsafe, and the reason for that is ABC. So at least it would minimise Phil's visits, because he wouldn't be going to wasted visits, or at least then he'd know what the tree damage or possibly is. So I think there is scope to look at training up a few operatives on tree risk assessments, if that's helpful.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, I couldn't make the pre-meeting meeting this morning, and as the Chair said, there was quite some considerable debate amongst the discussion amongst the councillors about ward issues. The one thing that was being picked up from my ward, and I'm sure other members will probably echo this as well, is that there's a perception amongst the public that there's been a decline in terms of the service offering from Torfaen. I've had it on numerous occasions. Torfaen used to come and maintain those trees. They would come every 2 years and they would be pruning, regular pruning and what have you of the trees as and when it was deemed necessary, and that's just come to a complete stop. Now, obviously, I understand we're under financial pressure with the cuts and what have you, and it is a concern. We've only got one resident arboriculturalist. Have we looked at perhaps more collaboration with neighbouring local authorities in the way that environmental health as the team has looked at, and what's going to be done to try and redress the maintenance issues if we've only got this one arboriculturist person.
Okay. We have got one arboriculturist person, but he has a team of 4 forest. Are they called forest?
Yeah, well, forest workers.
Forest workers. So he isn't on his own, as in, there's help in terms of managing the trees. He's a decision maker on trees, because we don't want people just chopping down trees, because they're very emotive. So you need somebody who's qualified to say which trees are diseased, dead, or whatever. But he has got a team of 4 that goes around, helping, cutting, pruning, making sure that the health and safety of the trees are okay. I don't know about the decline. I think I'd need to investigate that. I don't know whether that's a perception or whether that's a reality. I'll go back and have a look at that. In terms of some collaboration, yes, I think that's what we'd like to try and do with Bron Avon in particular, but I think they are at least place making as well with us. I have spoken to Monmouthshire County Council, and actually in terms of trees and looking at where we are, this survey that we had done of all of our trees in the borough and having them mapped out, we're ahead of them. So, we have applied best practice to our trees, and Monmouth isn't there. So, we're not behind the 8 ball here. In fact, in many ways, we've done a massive survey. I don't think Blaenau Gwent has done that either. They look after trees as they can. We've certainly gone out and done a massive survey. It's all on database, and it's a rolling programme to keep it going. Resources are tight, and I think that's where, if we could get into some sort of partnership collaboration, that could provide us with some resilience.
Thank you, Chair. My quick question, I need to disappear shortly, but it's to do with the figures you provided under the current statistics, which show that there was a 0.3 degradation in tree cover from 2009-2013. Do we have any more up-to-date figures up to 2017? Because it's worth noting that if that rate continues, it would be a very short space of time, I think about 50 years, in fact, before we'd reach 0. And my second point then is just to make sure that the strategy we do employ reverses that trend. And do we have a figure that we should be aiming for?
The decline was actually 1.2% decline. Yeah.
Yeah, the figures that you quote were taken out of the Natural Resources Wales study, which was done recently. I think all local authorities in Wales are having similar studies done. And the figures were compared to 2009 and 2013. So 2013 is the most up-to-date figures that we have. So we don't have a target yet. And part of that report produced by NRW was to encourage local authorities to set targets. And if we go down the route of having a tree strategy, then there will be targets in there to at least reverse the decline and, if possible, to increase the tree canopy going forward.
Councillor Thomas, you wanted to raise an issue now?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah. This is basically to do with antisocial behaviour with regards to the trees, forest trees and stuff. I'm not sure whether you guys are aware with what's been going on up at Two Pendress, where a vast amount of tree coverage has been taken away due to friendly or unfriendly mountain bike trail building crews. So my question is, if the members of the public see this, who do they report that to? Is that to us as council or NRW?
So, yeah, as you quite rightly point out, there's been some concerns about the mountain biking trails up there. I believe it's mainly on NRW land, so I suppose it's an NRW issue in that respect, in theory anyway. But I've had discussions with the managers at NRW and, trying to encourage them to work with us. And through the RDP programme, we're actually planning to do a bit of feasibility and, looking at how we can perhaps engage some of these mountain bike interest groups, which, have got a legitimate, desire to do some good stuff, but it needs to be properly managed. And, we'd like to work with them and try and develop a partnership to identify suitable areas where they may do this activity. And if it is on NRW land, work with NRW, but to manage it properly so we haven't got indiscriminate destruction of trees, perhaps in the wrong place. So, we'll just have to come back to you on that, I think.
Okay, the next question we had was, and Kathy's going back to the Bronavon issue now. We want to ensure, how do you ensure trees on private land such as Bronavon are inspected adequately? And the other issue that came out with this was, going back to the ward issues, when we get an issue with a tree, the constituent doesn't know who owns the land, and we get bounced around a little. So how do we deal with these type of issues?
Yeah.
That's what we were looking for some. We were hoping the tree policy will help with this.
It could. In terms of the tree inspection, I think Bronavon have their own regime and it's pretty good, my understanding is. They've got their GIS system that they inspected and they do a rolling programme, which is good for us, should we work together. Currently, you're right, if you've got a problem, you don't know which one, whether it's Bronavon you ring or it's Torvine or whatever. In the short term, I think that's going to be difficult to resolve, but I think in the longer term, we are certainly trying to work with Bronavon currently to try and get that we work more effectively together and look at ways of where we can have a one-stop shop. So people will think they're going to one number, but actually the IT government behind it will still, one will go off to Bronavon perhaps and one comes to us. So there is, work to be done on that. It's not going to be an overnight solution to it, but I think there is a will for that to happen between Bronavon and Torvine. So, we're looking at trying to go through those discussions with them currently, really. Long way to go yet, though,
Thank you, Chair. Just glad to hear you say that, Kath, because it's a similar approach that we had with grass cutting, really. Different thing entirely, but I think it needs to be joined up with the trees as well. So I'm encouraged to hear that.
Can we define what our duties are as an authority? I think it's
We're still on the team.
Yeah.
We're still on the tree management.
There's that one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can we define what our duties are as an authority? I think that's what it says.
So just to recap on that, then, our duties generally as a local authority to trees.
Yeah.
Well, we certainly have an obligation in terms of health and safety.
Yeah.
That is a key part, and that's a key part of the existing tree policy. The trees are managed on a risk-based approach for their health and safety risk. That's really important, and we have obligations of the Highways Act in terms of making certain that trees, as best as possible, don't fall on the highway. Public rights of way as well, and that sort of thing. However, trees are an asset as well. And under the legislation which I mentioned in my introduction, we should be looking to promote trees for their value as well as their potential health and safety risk. So going forward, I'd like to see a balance in the approach to tree management, one that does respect health and safety in terms of legislation, and one which also recognises their value in terms of future generations.
Stuart.
Thank you, Chair.
Just a supplementary on that point, please, if I may, before Stuart comes
Yeah, he's
in.
given way.
Thank you for that answer, but the report actually goes a lot further than that, and it references two other acts. We've got the Wellbeing of Future Generations Wales Act 2015 and the Environment Wales Act 2016, which in the report it says is focused renewed attention on the value of natural resources, and in fact it goes further to state that the well-being duty requires the local authority to take certain actions that are set out in the report, including setting and publishing objectives, well-being objectives, and taking all reasonable steps in exercising functions to meet those objections, and promoting biodiversity and ecosystem resilience, going forward. So there is quite a statutory responsibility as well, beyond what you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely right. That's the new sort of policy framework around delivering, if you like, council services in terms of the wellbeing legislation. And one of the obligations under the wellbeing legislation is that we produce objectives and a wellbeing plan, which is actually out for consultation at the moment. And within those, within that plan, there's 7 objectives. There are objectives around managing natural resources and climate change issues. So a tree strategy should be embedded within that process.
And the councillors want to come in. We're going to pick up on the Wellbeing Act and the discussion point 8, so we'll come back to that. I've got Stuart first, the 2 Stuarts.
Thank you, Chair. I will be brief. This is going back to the tree survey, really, as a layman and members of the public who are watching this scrutiny this afternoon. Is the 5-year policy the norm, is it, for the surveys to take place? As a member of the public watching this scrutiny now, we've talked about the inspections, the surveys of the trees in the borough, and it's a 5-year cycle, as you said, Andrew. Is that the norm, a 5-year cycle, or is it, how is that arrived at?
Well, the policy would have been developed by the street scene officers before, I was part of the service, but I would suspect that that policy was put in place and agreed by members in accordance with recommendations through, specialist advice from the arboricultural sector and, health and safety regulations. But we can check that, we can check the exact detail on that and how that, cycle was arrived at.
Just come in very, very briefly. Yeah, I'd welcome that, because, it'd be interesting to know how other authorities carry out surveys and the length of time that they revisit them.
Briefly, TPOs are obviously under planning. Is there other planning stuff, and whether we can do supplementary planning on this as well, because that'd be quite interesting. The other stuff I've noticed is SUDS and other mitigation methods for flooding and stuff like that. That's under the new acts as well, is it?
You mean SUDS under the new?
Under the new Environmental Act. You do seem to suggest that. Sorry, you did seem to suggest that.
Yeah, it's all called up under the Environment Act legislation.
Should we explain what SUDS are for people that might be listening?
SUDS are sustainable urban drainage systems where you use natural features to manage flood risk, particularly in urban areas.
Okay, if we move on to on the tree replacement policy, and here you weren't here this morning, but members generally felt supportive of this recommendation, so we didn't really have any questions other than support there, unless Norman, do you? No?
Yeah, there's not a question as such. Yes, we were in agreement. It would be good, but how can we make it happen?
I think the proposed document will have several functions, one of which is to do as the existing document does, and as I said earlier, clarify the policies in terms of management of trees, but it also could act as a supporting document to bid for funds that could, from any source really, or to support that Section 106 agreement through planning processes, so as we can be able to secure whatever funding may be out there to deliver the objectives of the overall plan. And I think, that's part of the approach we're trying to take.
I think it's not really a question so much as a statement. What agencies or community, because you've got a lot of people out there who might benefit from doing this. I mean, obviously the community woodlands are one of them, and various green initiatives. It is something that could actually usefully be done by the community, isn't it? Growing trees.
The second,
Sorry,
Councillor. You've gone on the discussion
Sorry,
point.
sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's all something we agreed on earlier and wholeheartedly support the object. Whether it's financially supportive, I don't know. On that point, I just wanted to make an inquiry about the plant project, which was the celebrated birth or adoption of a child. Is that ongoing now at the moment? Do we know where trees were planted?
From my understanding, the only plant site we have in Torvine is at Garn Lakes, which we had funding from NRW to manage that site for, I think, for 3 years. That funding has come to the end of this financial year. But they've told me recently that they are actively looking for other sites in Torvine to develop as plant sites. So there are resources, or I assume there are resources from NRW to establish further plant sites, which is plant a tree for every newborn in Torvine, in Wales. So that is still ongoing as far as I'm aware.
The outcome of those discussions when they're finalised?
Certainly, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as you said, I couldn't make the pre-meeting meeting this morning, but it is actually mentioned in the report, and I do support this as well. My views, I'm sure, are similar to other members. Many local authority tree strategies include a tree replacement policy. For example, the Wrexham Tree and Woodland Strategy 2016 to 2026 includes the following policy. Wherever appropriate and practical, the Council will replace any trees it removes with at least 2 trees of a species appropriate for the site, conditions as close as possible to the location of the trees which have been removed. And then they further go on to say the Council will plant at least 100 new trees per year on suitable sites. So my question is, do you feel it would be appropriate for us as a committee to make a recommendation for Torvine to adopt a similar policy where we actually stipulate that 2 new trees will be planted as a replacement, and we actually set a target for the number of new trees planted each year to address this decline over the 4-year period of the 1.2%? And if you feel that we should support that, how many new trees per year do you feel would be an appropriate figure?
I think the Wrexham Tree Strategy, I think, has been written quite recently, and I think that's probably the one which a lot of people look to as the one which has been written in the context of the new policy framework. So the figures that I quote in the report there, I think, are relevant. It's there's the ratios in that table there of 2 to every 1 tree felled, and in some other circumstances maybe 5 for 1 tree felled. And that's because if you likely to fell a tree, it's likely to be an old tree with a big canopy. If you're going to replace it, you're going to replace it with a smaller tree, so you're still going to lose your overall canopy. So I would like to think that if we're going to reverse the declining tree canopy, then we have to have some approach that looks to replant trees where we're able to do so. In terms of a target of how many to plant, then I couldn't give you one off the top of my head. From an ecologist, I would say we could plant as many as we can. But realistically, probably have to set a target which is realistic.
It does raise a question. Obviously, you've got the Stroud experience where they planted along cycleways with cider apples. You've also got the fact that we felled things like the community woodlands. I know it's a different question. We're not just talking council land here, are we? But it raises questions, things like if we're going to clean out the canal basin, there's a lot of desirability to take out things like sycamores up there. Do we take a policy like that? Also, the other one I raised about parks. If we clean out parks, there's a lot of stuff in parks because some of our maintenance stuff, you've got sycamores growing all over parks, not desirable trees. In some cases, about whether you have desirable and undesirable species, whether you replant with desirable species. Also, you're looking at shrubs in parks, not necessarily big trees, small trees. It's about which species you consider desirable. Obviously, you've got about pollinators as well. So you've got a whole thing in there, haven't you, going, I'm in favour of, we've got the linear nature reserves, Canal Park and other greenways we've got. There's a whole lot of issues in there. I think we've got quite a lot of land we could plant on if we looked at it in an obtuse way.
I'll just bring the council.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. We were just on about sites of where we could plant trees and stuff. Are there any plans for urban tree planting at all?
Whilst I agree with all the aspirations, and they'd be my aspirations as well, we have to take into context the budget situation that we've got, and so we have to take a balanced approach, I think, in the plan going forward to carefully set out our aspirations in terms of tree cover, increasing tree cover, but within the context of council budgets. That's not to say that the money wouldn't perhaps be there from other sources. So it's about working differently, I think, to be able to achieve the overall aims of the plan.
Can I just pick up on the point about desirability? Because I think it's a really important issue. Because you could argue that many of the issues which you as ward members face from residents is because of trees which are unsuitable for the location, causing a problem. I've recently been dealing with a TPO application for an oak tree in an area in Cwmbran, and the residents are complaining that the acorns are dropping on their cars and so on. Now, a little bit of thought in selecting a different species at that location would have taken that issue away. So desirability is absolutely fundamental, and if we're going to go forward with planting extra trees, then we have to make certain that the species and the trees are right for the location.
I just say another 100,000 Leylandis is not going to be desirable, is it? That is the problem you've got in. They are a superb screening tree in the right location alongside Cwmbran Drive. They're excellent, but you don't want another 100 in the Highlands up by Blaenavon, because that wouldn't be desirable. And they're not a pollinator.
What Stuart has just said about desirability, just wanted to gather your thoughts about the constant pressures that members receive regarding the cherry trees and the roots that cause damage, and have you any thoughts on the desirability aspect regarding cherry trees?
Well, as I said in my previous response, really, it's horses for courses. It's making certain that trees in the right location. Cherry trees, when they're in blossom, are absolutely fantastic, and they produce cherries, obviously, so they do have a value, and I think it's that aspect that's sometimes forgotten. But if they are causing a problem for whatever reason, then you could argue they've been planted in the wrong place.
We need to move on to the next one. I mean, I think the view of the committee was there's certainly agreement in principle to this, and you've raised this dimension now, all the members have, about desirability. So we'll give that some thought in when we look at our recommendations. Now, if we move on to the discuss the next one is the establishment of a council tree nursery. Now, Stuart, you came in on this earlier, so you can come back in now.
I am fairly desirable about the establishment of a council tree nursery. Obviously, I did raise the possibility of using the community or other ways. You obviously might have another view on that, but I did take your note about having resources as well, which maybe is a way of mitigating what I blurted out earlier. I'd like to hear your views on it, Andrew. You obviously got views on that.
The tree nursery idea was something that you've been talking about, Steve. So can I let Steve answer that? Because it's all about, locally sourced species and that kind of thing, really, which is the objective, I think.
A suggestion for a council tree nursery sounds pretty grand. Sounds like a big commercial operation, but it could be as simple as in developing a project with schools to collect the acorns. Schools could grow them on, and they could be, for argument's sake, put in a polytunnel, a T-line. So when I say tree nursery, it could be absolutely as basic and as simple as that. One thing I'd like to raise is, obviously, we've got some historic parks and gardens in Torfaen, and advice from Cadw is that where a tree has to be removed within these parks and gardens, such as Pontypool Park, that we should seek to replace those trees with trees which have been grown on from seeds from the park. So if we agree with that approach, then we have to have some mechanism for doing that, and a tree nursery in whatever form is a way of doing that. But I'm certainly not expecting us to sort of mobilise resources for a big commercial operation. It could be as simple as I said, encouraging schools to collect acorns and growing them on, or even community groups doing the same thing.
I would make a suggestion that you might ask our allotment groups, consider I'm chair of allotments, and a space on the community site on the allotments, which we're all keen to do now. Talking a patch the size of this table will raise a lot of little trees, and they're all vying with each other to do community spaces now. I'm probably watching at the moment, but I'm sure that some of them are public spirited enough to do that, and you could raise a lot of acorns in a little space there.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If I could just come up on that. You're saying about the budgets and the resources. From my experience, before the ward boundaries were moved, the council undertook some excellent work at Llanarafon Manor with the planting of a new orchard there. And from a resourcing point of view, we managed to get a lot of, I think, young offenders to come in and to do the planting, and that was an excellent scheme. So more perhaps usage of that, if that's possible, wouldn't have such a big impact on council officers. Yes, okay, it would need supervision, but that was an excellent example of something that came to the fore. Yes, there was costs involved, obviously, in acquiring the fruit trees to go in there, but if we could promote schemes like the schools or communities, or maybe the people on allotments and all the rest of it, in terms of growing on young trees, but I'm sure there would be council-owned land that would facilitate a tree nursery, even if it wasn't on a grand, commercial scale, growing hundreds of thousands of trees. At least we could use that to promote, trees grown from local ones. But I just wanted to bring to the attention of the committee that one scheme that worked remarkably well in the past, with securing a new orchard and getting the young offenders in to help as well. So perhaps greater usage of that could be something to be looked at going forwards.
who was said some of the things I was going to say. But, you know, Steve, you mentioned bringing the schools in. Do you think there could be external funding, working in partnership? You know, you know, sometimes you can get funding if children are sort of coming into these schemes, and even partnership with other organisations. You know, you probably know in Panteg, you know, there's an excellent group doing excellent work in that park. I mean, they would be entitled to go for funding. Do you think you could work in partnership with people like that, you know, for funding?
Just picking up on Norma's point, one of the questions we raised this morning, are there any opportunities to bid for grants, which is, you know, on the same theme, so if you could...
Yeah, okay, well, we're always looking for grants. Always. And I think one of the fundamental principles of the way we work is to work in partnership with people in the community. And I think we've got, you know, a fairly good track record of doing that. You mentioned Panteg Park, and, you know, that's part of our team's activity, Lanarama Manor. And we've got a partnership with Community Rehabilitation Company, which runs the old probation scheme to engage people like that. We support lots of friends and community groups. We work with the community councils. I think, you know, there's lots of great stuff going on. That's not to say that we couldn't improve mind and perhaps become more formal in some of the ways that this is done, but I think it's definitely a good thing to have in this policy document.
One thing that Andrew came out this morning when we were chatting to NRW was we were asking about small groups like allotments or sports organisations. They have a grant scheme, so that's something maybe we as a council should be publicising, and the gentleman we spoke to this morning seemed keen on that.
Just picking up on the point that the chair just made then, do you have a lot of contact and liaison with the rural local action group? I think is Nikki Williams, because obviously that's another source of funding from there. And the question that Councillor Evans asked earlier in terms of tree sponsorship schemes, I don't think that was answered actually. Is there a mechanism whereby residents can actually pay for a tree to be planted? I know my mum planted a tree out when she was on holiday in Thailand as a sort of a memorial. There was the ability to be able to do that. Wondered if we could looked at the possibility of having a scheme in Torfaen whereby you could pay for a tree to be planted, perhaps in memoriam of somebody. Or
So take the first point about the RDP programme. We work closely with Rob Wellington and Nikki Williams. In fact, we've got an officer funded under the RDP programme, which is Alvin Nicholas, who's done a lot of work on the uplands with the commoners. And remember earlier I mentioned the looking at the mountain bike activities going on, the feasibility into perhaps getting them organised. Well, that would be an RDP activity. So we do have a close working relationship with the RDP people. Like I say, we're constantly looking for ways, innovative ways of funding all this kind of activity. The other point.
Residents pay.
Well, yes, sponsorship. I think that's an excellent idea, and it's something that perhaps we could think about setting up. But I think the difficulty always comes in is in the maintenance after of the tree, particularly as to establish a tree. You need to do various things like weeding around it and just making sure it's pruned properly. So there's a cycle of activity that's required thereafter. So planting the tree is just one part of the overall process. So we just need to be careful. Then we've got mechanisms in place to be able to manage whatever we plant. But I do think it's a good idea.
I hasten to mention this, but you know I'm the chair of Torfaen Environmental Association Trust. At the moment, the landfill tax is changing. I think we might be getting a different mechanism there. I only say that because I'm chair of that. Also, the various organisations are doing Adopt a Tree Brian Brown Woodland Trust do it. There is some suggestion they would like to do it. I think they do it down Pontypool Park. But there's no reason why other people couldn't do it. As a memory thing, adopt an apple tree, adopt a tree. Whoever's got a thing like that going. Woodland Trust are giving out a lot of money at the moment, I just noticed. And then the other group that started, I think an absolutely amazing organisation, is the Walled Garden people down at the new hospital. And I think some sort of joint project with them and the Health Authority does seem an obvious one, because they're also working with Tidy Britain, the Tom Borden company. That seems an obvious project along this line. They've got a lot of volunteers that could be growing. I'm not promising anything, but the obvious things about joint collaborative working on these things and people that need to learn rural skills, it just seems an obvious one, doesn't it? And then there's my old friend the Canal Boys as well. There's lots and lots of joint collaborative type projects that we can put up in place here for the sort of people that like doing that sort of work, because we don't have a lot of opportunities. The way you could generate in all this is actually really, really sort of. And then there's not groundwork, the people that do therapeutic growing, they're based in Newport, they've got a place in Cwmbran now as well. A lot of people around at the moment who can do this sort of thing.
For the purpose of this document, I think it's to establish the principles that we will work with communities, because we wouldn't want to specifically identify certain ones, because automatically then we may exclude others that could come along in the near or long-term future.
Thank you for that. We'll move on now to discussion point 4, availability of council land for connective tree planting schemes. And there was a technical point here. A number of us didn't know what the green infrastructure methodology is and how it can help identify suitable areas of land for planting. So I don't know if somebody wants to give us a very quick, brief overview of the green infrastructure methodology.
Quick is the operative word there, I think. The Green Infrastructure Assessment Methodology is a draft methodology, an approach to trying to place a value on land for the services that piece of land provides. So we very often talk in terms of monetary value of land, but land can also provide free services which are not always taken into account. So what we're trying to do as a team is put together an assessment which values a piece of land, not only for its economic value, but also for the service it provides. So it could be providing a resource to moderate water runoff in an urban environment. It could be providing an informal amenity area for children to play. Those sorts of issues are not always accounted for in terms of a piece of land. What we're trying to do is bring that into the discussion.
I don't know what other committee members think. That sounds sensible. Yes? Right, we'll move on then. Thank you for that explanation. Mic back on. The next one is protected species, discussion point 5, protected species awareness sessions. This again was coming up to ward type issues, and now would it be possible to include other groups, not just staff in the training, such members of sports grounds, police grounds, RSLs, etc.? The concern was, we're talking this morning about guidance, for example, for sports clubs, and what was coming out from the discussion was they need awareness training, but there's a huge burden on them in terms of particularly the smaller community groups, in terms of resource. So, should they also have this training, which you're talking about, but is there anything we can do to help in terms of resource? Now, I know maybe that's a daft question in the current austerity climate, but they were the sort of issues the members were raising this morning.
I think partly it's about them being aware that they can come to us, they can come to Steve for advice. It's not so much about them doing it on their own, it's about a supporting mechanism. Do you want to add to that, Steve?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm always at the end of the phone for anybody that wants to seek advice. The issue there, I think, is making certain that staff and people managing in particular trees understand that there are legal obligations around protected species. And what I don't want to see happen is some management to a tree which is done in good faith. And for argument's sake, somebody says that they've been watching, I don't know, bats coming out of a hole in a tree, and suddenly there's a legal issue to deal with. So it's very important, I think, that these issues are communicated widely. And as long as people managing natural features such as trees understand that there could be legal issues, then that's absolutely fine. But it's making people understand that there are protected species issues that could be applicable to managing trees or other vegetation.
Steve's an amazing resource. I would say this because I've been on one or two of his bat sessions, and bats are a real minefield, aren't they? And bats live in trees. And the other thing that he does like to go on, because I go on about, is mushrooms and fungi, because they go with him as well. So you get a lot of that, and I've been out on sessions with him, and things like three-cornered leeks, was it, on the field down the back of my place, and all those things all over the place. So I used him quite mercilessly, to be quite honest, and then canal and stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff around the place which does need knowing about. And if you don't know about it, we've got stuff all over. Everybody has. It is our most valuable resource and things like that. The canal's full of it as well. And we've got different varieties of lily, all sorts of things. It just goes on and on and on and on. It's a minefield.
But it is important that we separate out general wildlife and biodiversity from the ones which carry legal obligations. But just going back to the training, I've done training before. I've done a fair bit of training for Bronavon in the past on protected species issues. I'm always open to delivering training within the spare capacity which I may have or may not have. But certainly internally within the council, there's certainly an obligation to make certain that we understand our legal obligations around protected species.
Cool, thank you. Councillor Thomas, do you want to come in on the next one, which is discussion point 6? Because we were chatting this morning about housing developments, and it came up in the context of your ward.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Obviously, down in the good state of Llantarnam, where much development is going on. So who would be responsible for the management and maintenance of trees on these housing development sites?
Just as a supplementary to that, what we're finding now is with some of these new housing developments that, particularly in Llantarnam Ward, the council are not going to be responsible for the maintenance of the roads in the future. Now, if they're not responsible for the maintenance of the roads, who's responsible for the trees on the verges, etc.? So we were trying to tease that wider issue out as well. And I know it's Grayson Way. We don't want to go into ward issues, trying to be strategic, but these new ways of dealing with road maintenance must impact on the trees, and we need to be thinking about that issue as well. That was the wider point.
I believe this is the situation on the South Sebastopol site, which is quite unique, I've been led to believe. How do you envisage that working in the future? If you can put that with this question, please.
With the two questions at the same time, so it's all tied together. No, the other issue is now, and there is a ward issue, for example, in Hentless, you had lots of developers in there, with all planting trees, 30 years on, because it was 28 years ago Hentless was really developed. A lot of these developers have gone out of business, the land's been sold on. So, and again now with these new planning rules and the way roads are maintained, what happens with these businesses when they disappear? Will it fall back on the council? So it's a wide issue, this is, which we were grappling with this morning.
Well, I can only respond in terms of what I know about green space, which is within housing developments. Traditionally, I think, historically, these green space elements whether it's grass, whether it's individual trees or woodland, has been offered back to the council. But I think, obviously, because of the cuts, that's no longer happening. What is currently happening, from my understanding, certainly on South Sebastopol and on some sites, I think in Lantarnum, is that there will be a management company employed by the developer to manage those green space elements in accordance with an agreed management plan, which is tied into the planning process. So that is it in a nutshell. That is what is happening on these sites now. The management is being done by a management company, which is a private company, and that's how it goes forward. And certainly on South Sebastopol, that is the approach. And the residents on South Sebastopol make an annual contribution to the cost of managing the green space. But it's all done in agreement with the management plan.
I just wanted to mention something about the proposal for landscape buffer zones, because I think a lot of the issues, the maintenance issues that we have today and the revenue drain on people like Phil Grimes, is that a lot of people have got trees very close to their boundaries, and though that arrangement has been agreed by the council through the planning process in the past, and of course, you know, at the time, the decisions probably seemed, you know, reasonable. But then, you know, the complaints come in from people, trees are too close to their house, or it's causing problems to their boundaries, or it's overhanging their gardens, and all these things become a revenue drain then for the authority because of previous decisions. So that's why perhaps we thought it may be appropriate to think about how this might be dealt with through the planning process, and in consultation with planning, you know, this is why they were very keen to have something in this document.
We agreed that there should be supplementary planning guidance this morning. I mean, and we'll discuss that as a group afterwards, but it was just these other these issues, and you've listed them there, the overshadowing, the water abstraction, fallen trees. These are the day-to-day issues that come our way, and then we come to you.
I actually live on a 20-house development, and I know where they crammed all the houses in. The trees, some of them London planes, that type of tree, are actually 60 foot tall, and they had to come to an agreement with the council, the developer and the residents to actually lock the things down because they were too big. There's still one tree in there that's too big, but you know, there's a TPO on that as well, which, you know, for the council is a hell of a lot of money really when you start looking at it. And all down through the new town there's trees like that all the way around. So the issue about tree management in the new town, certainly, I'm not so sure about the rest of the valley, but certainly there is a big issue. And we talked about connected when we did the other meeting that we went to for the partnership board, about connectivity of green spaces and how you manage trees in there. To my mind, is a big issue, you know, and you say about affordability for the council to manage that little lot. I mean, Lantarnum is actually a really good example because it's got the park in there, it's got the space, and it's all for you. Need to manage it all. I don't know where we go with that, but and then we don't start to talk about ancient and modern hedges and all the rest of those, because that's another act, isn't it? We haven't even mentioned that Hedge Act. You know, the implications of that, and whether people go in and dig them up, whether we could do them under that or not, which technically we should be doing under the Ancient Hedge Act. There's a lot of those in Cwmbran, and then when they plonk the new town on top of it.
Yeah. 8.7 now, the Biodiversity and Ecosystem Resilience Plan. We said yes to this.
You said yes.
Yeah. So I don't think we need, unless you weren't here this morning, we're generally in favour of this discussion point. So I'd like to move on to 8.8, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. Now, when we had Natural Resources Wales in earlier, do you think the question we've got is, do you think there are benefits of the tree strategy applying to all the Torfaen Public Service Board organisations, and if so, what are they? When we asked that question this morning to Natural Resources Wales, he said yes, it should apply to them all. So we agreed with that. We want collaboration and partnership working. So I don't know if you...
I'd say yes to that as well.
I thought you might.
One other aspect, which I did bring up, and you said, do you have to, but I will. One is, obviously, I'm saying that because he's not, but the one aspect of it is obviously health board, police, people like that. The health board's got quite big holdings. The other one that struck me was the highway authority, bearing in mind we've got quite a big bit of that going through the borough as well, haven't we? You've got a lot of trees on that?
So you mean the Welsh Government's
Yes.
on the trunk roads?
Yeah. Are they involved in that side of things? The other people that struck me have got very big holdings in our borough, the semi-private, the railways. Yeah.
I think we probably need to pick that up with the Public Service Board team within the authority, because to my knowledge, I'm not sure if those people are engaged.
From our perspective, I think we'll discuss this as the committee in a minute, so I'm not preempting what the committee are going to say, but there was a desire that this should apply to all the members of the Public Service Board. The Wellbeing Plan is out for consultation at the moment, so I'm going to suggest to the committee that we write to Lyndon Puddy to make sure that's a recommendation they should be looking at.
Can I ask you whether you've got any observations on that, because I've just mentioned that one, because they are big players, aren't they? The major trunk road is a big one, which has got implications to you, because people will always think it's you. When we get nonsense with hedges and trees, they think it's us, the borough that is, and we get it every year. Oh look, that hedge has been cut up there. It's something that drives me mad as a councillor, because I know that, when we get hedge problems.
Well, undoubtedly, the Public Service Board organisations, ideally, this document, this policy going forward, would be owned by all of those organisations, and, that's the right approach. But like I say, I'm not sure about, at least the Welsh Government manage the trunk road, so they need to be engaged, and I suppose what you're saying is Network Rail, and those discussions haven't yet taken place, but I think, they could take place.
The only reason I notice it is because our allotment, dear old thing, is directly behind it.
Move on to discussion point 9, fresh strategic approach to the protection and enhancement of trees. Yes, we said this morning, unless anyone, who I'm thinking of you particularly, but we were in favour of this one.
Thank you for giving the opportunity to come in there, Chair. Yes, I agree as well. I was reading ahead of the Chair there in terms of the sections on the report, and I think it's pretty concisely worded, actually, on page 37 and the top of page 38 in terms of what we should be considering. It's broadly set out in the following themes of vision. Theme 1, community, place and heritage. Theme 2, sustainability, climate change and natural capital. Theme 3, planning. I think there's scope for us to be able to do more, particularly on the planning aspect. Theme 4, woodland management, council trees and implication. The point I'd like to ask, though, a question I'd like to ask is, if we're going to have this fresh strategic approach in Torfaen, how much influence do we have over the RSLs, like Bronavon and Melin, perhaps to influence them to look at the tree policies and perhaps encourage them to undertake a fresh approach as well?
Yes, Councillor. Both Bronavon and Melin are on the Public Service Board. They're part of the partnership, and I think because through that process we can encourage them to be part of this overall strategy.
And that was the conclusion we thought this morning. Actually, we want to get at them because they sit on that board. And put my mic back on. Discussion point, where are we now? 10. Tree management on leased grounds. We've touched on this already. And we're grateful for your comments about Steve, the support you would give. I'm just reading through this a minute. Yes, we said to this, but...
I was going to ask a question, wasn't he? But he's left.
Yeah, I mean, normally, do you want to come in?
Well,
Well, it was just... organisations in particular, it's a resource issue for them. What can we do to support them in that way?
I want to come in as well.
Go on then.
Yeah, that's the, thing I wanted to bring up, Chairman. We're all for tree management on this ground. You need to know what's going on. But these organisations don't have the money to do it. And it's a huge problem for them. These trees are around sports pitches, as you know. And they just don't have the money, they just don't know where to turn. So is it a good idea to expect them to do this without funding?
Other issue is 44 allotments in Torvine, and you remember Duncan and Sean having a discussion about one tree that cost £1,700 to remove, and that business about, at the moment, I think it's £6,000 per group, and they don't have the money if it starts going on. There was a discussion with our NRW about riparian ownership of the middle of River Avon Lloyd as well, which is another issue as well. He said he'd go away and have a look at that one. No, it's a big issue, but there's several allotments on the Avon Lloyd. That's a big issue because same issue with the sports grounds. I also brought up the fact that some of the community halls have also got dirty great trees next to them as well. It's not just sports grounds. And if you start bringing parks into the frame, which you might have to, start to look at parks as an issue. Now, allotments. If you're giving them £6,000, there's a tree to deal with, as you well know, it's going to be £1,700, whoever will get to deal with it. You also got dirty great hedges when you look at Woodland Road and various other ones. They cost a lot of money. Members of the allotments are doing it at the moment, which raises other issues. And you get all sorts of people doing it. Now, is that desirable or not? I don't know. We are doing it. And we are capable of doing it, and we can take trees out in some cases. That shouldn't, there are issues there as well. Just looking at that, and I think there ought to be some commonality around this and some arrangements which shouldn't really rely on a different way of doing it. It shouldn't be the head of the paid service having discussions, I don't think.
So, do you want to come in,
I can add a bit more flavour to that. Some of the newly elected members have left. We've still got one here. I mean, what has happened historically here with this is that when Torvine was looking to kind of offset the sports clubs back to the local community sports clubs, and this is the least sports pitches. A number, depending on when their lease was up for renewal. I know in the case, I don't want to speak too much about parochial issues, but I do know within the case of Pontean PDSC, they did take up a new lease, and they were told at the time, they aired concerns about trees and tree maintenance, and they were told, well, that's why you have insurance. A site survey was undertaken. You and the gentleman came out to have a look at one particular tree. But I know that wasn't the case with all of the sports grounds, and some of them indeed didn't sign leases, new leases, because of some concerns that they had. So there was that. It was inconsistency amongst the different sports grounds, and it was trying to get a consistent approach to it. And at the time, former councillor Brooks raised the point to saying about the sports clubs when they were taking on responsibility for the trees in the immediate vicinity of the sports pitches. At that time, there hadn't been a survey undertaken of the trees to assess the integrity, to see whether they were healthy or diseased. So really it was trying to get a consistent approach across all the different sports pitches to determine, one, to get the assessment done and get them on the database, and two, to undertake any remedial works, if necessary, prior to an agreed handover to that particular organisation. And yet there's also the difference then between what happens with these organisations that have already signed the new lease and are now deemed to be responsible for maintaining those trees. So it was really about consistency and getting a consistent approach across all of that.
Respond. Just briefly on that one then, the discussion point 10 does talk about providing specific guidance for people leasing sports grounds, and I don't see why any strategy can't include that within the strategy. So there would be guidance how you manage trees. How you pay for that is a different issue, and I don't have an answer to that.
I mean, that was part of the savings for Torvine, I'm afraid, and I think this was done a couple of years ago, probably 2 years now, is it? In terms of the leases going out, but I think that was part and parcel of that. You know, the lease went out and the trees and hedgerow become the sports facilities, you know, their responsibility to maintain. Obviously, Steve just reiterated any of those sports clubs or allotment holders could ring up for advice on trees, and Phil Grimes will also help with any advice. But once those leases were signed, really, it is their responsibility. And I understand what you're saying. It's a lot of money. It's 1,400. But again, if you bring that back to Torvine, then there would be no savings again. You wouldn't have got the savings that you got in the first place. So unfortunately, it is something we've got to live with. It was a policy made that we do lease out our sports land and allotments, and that, you know, the trees and hedgerow is the responsibility of that club. We'd certainly try and help in any way we can, but I think ultimately that was the policy, and it's very difficult to change that now, really.
The only thing I think it is, it's an impedance to the smooth operation of some of the more desirable sides of this. And having seen Duncan sat there with Sean having a discussion, it got into really bad, and it started getting down to the policy of exceptionability, which I didn't like, and I don't think Duncan liked that either. And I understand what you're saying, we made this policy. The other problem we had, and Hugh brought it up beautifully, was that a lot of organisations, and Steve Brooks mentioned this, it stopped community councils getting involved with this where they could fund this because of this business. And there maybe is a better way round it, which we need to find. The other is that a lot of local organisations, for one reason or another, didn't take it on. Now, it means that sports pitches are a big no-no. It means community halls are a big no-no. And the policy on allotments, you block the whole thing out because you use bureaucratic accessibility on it, which is a problem because we're trying to get into future generations. Now, I think we need to look at that creatively, and maybe I've got some suggestions how we get around that, which is actually being positive about it, not negative about it, which is the problem the way we do things, unfortunately. My suggestions around it is using the product we got, but I'll mention that later when we get onto that particular subject. In other words, we've got trees and stuff there, we could offer services out, which rather than say, no, don't do something, we positively do something, which is where the plus or minuses of the trees. Yeah?
Come in there. I think we've listened to what the officers have got to say. Let me just finish and hear you. I think on this one, on the last question, whether it goes out to public consultation or not, the committee was of the yes, please. I think you're going to get a lot of comments from this group of organisations and individuals. So Stuart strayed into there what we're going to recommend. So we'll pick that up in a minute, Stuart.
I want to ask officers.
Hang on, who wanted to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was just as a supplementary, just to get clarification on part of that particular question. When the survey was done, was it then retrospectively done on the trees surrounding these sports pitches? You know, the survey for the tree new database. Have the sports pitches trees been surveyed as part of the overall survey?
Sorry. The answer is I don't know that. I'll go back and find that out. I would imagine all trees on council land was surveyed. But whether that was done on, retrospective if the, following the club signing up their lease, and was anything done about the tree afterwards, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but I can certainly go back and try and find some of that information out for you.
Thank you. Just very quickly, Chair, because that is the point, you see, once they sign the lease, it's whether it's deemed to be council land or not.
Yeah.
If they sign the lease, it could be, oh no, they're responsible for maintaining that now, so we haven't surveyed it. But Duncan did say at the time that, yes, they were hoping that these sports pitches would be included in the overall survey, even if the club had taken on the lease for accepting the fact that they were going to be responsible for them. They hadn't necessarily had surveys done on the trees.
Ask a question of those, all of you really. I see some positives. The positive bits of the trees is that we could almost do a social enterprise type thing on the back of what we've got to offer here, something that can bring an income in, if you like, to offset some of the costs. Not a total one. One is you've got an educative thing. Steve's done stuff in the past about, the educational potential for schools, etc. I know you do a lot of this anyway. Some of which, I don't know, can bring an educational or social benefit in. Bats is one of them. The trees themselves, not necessarily do it yourself, but you've got a way in which you can work with that. That's got an income potential in it. It's a bit like community farm in some ways, this stuff. Trees, etc. The other is what happens to when we actually go in there and do work on it. We've got lumber, we've got timber, we've got this trimmings, all that stuff. And then my other favourite one is when we're getting in there and we had this conversation before, haven't we? Sticks, tree. We've got lots and lots of little baby ash trees, and we've got lots and lots of hazel, stuff like that. If we thin out things, I think Springvale and Churchwood is ours, lots of places like that. I'd love dearly to see that lot thinned out. Work with public even. We did stuff years ago. We get grants for doing it, and we've got lots of saleable projects, because every single allotment in this borough, every gardener would love to have sustainable timber and not import in bamboo. You've got that stuff. Jonathan Howells is extremely good at this stuff, and the other foresters are as well. We've got products in there. We've got community industry of some sort or another. There's stuff you can do there. Plus the fact, all that biomass, we've got biomass boilers, etc., etc. I've seen good examples further up the valley where one of the canal boat builders has actually got lots of stuff in there. It's not, if you manage it properly, you've got lots of stuff that can come back into the borough. And of that I'm convinced. Now, whether we've talked about this in other clean air committees where we've used, what can we do on the back of what we've got? It's sustainable. I'm not a sustainability champion for nothing. And then there's the other nice one is biochar. Do a few examples.
We'll move on. I think I've already... No, that's fine. The last point was, when we discussed this morning, yes, we want it published and we want there to be a consultation. And there was clear steer from the committee on that. I'll move on now. I think that's the end of this round of questioning of officers. We've also received comments on Facebook from members of the public for consideration, and I'm really grateful to that. I don't know if the officers have seen these, but we'll give you some copies. We had a lot of comments, and there's a lot of interest, so I'll just read out a couple. I would like to know if there are plans to replace the trees that were cut down in the forestry in Blenavon. Stop people cutting them down just because they don't want to sweep up the leaves. It's a shame that the other 77% is covered with litter dropped by the council. I'm just giving you a few examples there, but I'm grateful to the members of the public.
Some really positive ones, the first one.
Yeah.
Really
Well, I'll read, it's quite long. Brilliant. We have planted in excess of 20,000 trees and hedge plants on our farm over the last couple of years. New housing development should have fruit trees in each plot. Shared areas should have an abundance of edible fruit trees with native hedging, which cannot be removed by legal deeds. So I perhaps was a little wrong just reading out 3 negative ones. I was just picking them at random. There's a mix of negative and positive in there, and I think we should be very grateful to members of the public for sending them in. And I'd encourage members of the public to respond to the consultation when it's published on our website. I'd like to thank members
officers for their support. I thank them for the very comprehensive report. And we'll let them leave now, and then we'll discuss our recommendations. So while the officers are leaving, we can have a little 2-minute comfort break if members require it. Okay.
Okay. I thought it was a useful session with the officers this morning and with Natural Resources Wales. I'd just like to remind the committee now that the role of our scrutiny activity and the key questions is to come up with recommendations. We're still on webcam, so I'm going to ask you in a minute for your thoughts in formulating the recommendations. I think possibly the best way of dealing with this is if we go through the discussion points one at a time, and Kath has been making copious notes, so she'll be, and Rachel has, so they'll be able to assist us with this process. And I know members have got some issues they want to raise, so as we come to them, we'll raise them. And if we miss anything, raise them at the end and we'll make sure they're included. So I want to capture as much as we possibly can. So if we turn to discussion point 1, which was on page 33, tree management. And the discussion point was, are all the policies set out within the existing approach still relevant? If so, are they sufficiently clear and robust, protect and manage our tree stock and the health and safety of the public? Kath, do you want to come in now and just see what...
Okay, members, as we were discussing that, a question was raised about criteria for the tree officers to go out. And I think what came up from Andrew's point of view and from things that you've said yourselves is that the new strategy needs to be more explicit, and that's so members of the public and officers can clearly show and explore and evidence to the people who have got the queries why decisions are being made, but they need to be more specific. Almost as well as a protection for the officer, because he needs to be able to back up why his decisions are being made. We know that resources are tight. There is only him trained to be able to make those decisions. So if there's explicit information there that he can follow and show all the way through in evidence, then it's support for him, but it also gives everybody who's involved an understanding of how those decisions were made.
So, yes. I'll let Kath draft the recommendation along those lines. We are content with that?
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
We also, there's a point about, are you going to do the one, I can never say the word, one officer that's qualified to do this?
Yeah, I can't.
No. We need to get more knowledge down the system.
Yes. Is the point Stuart is making there, there's only one qualified
I've got a
tree specialist.
Tree specialist, that's a better way.
Can the council, the officers explain in a little bit more detail about the support network underneath him? Because he said there were 4 forestry workers or officers. For the volume of trees in our borough, that there was a concern raised by the committee about.
I think if that guy was off, how do we cover the work? And 2, we need to sort of be able to, we've got a lot of common trees. There's a common problem. It does beg the question. The commonality of problems. They hooked up. What's the word?
So I think
skills that are able to cope with that.
So I think the point is, the recommendation needs to be worded around capacity was the second thing, and the first thing is a proper criteria that we can all understand and members of the public can understand. So they're the 2 points we need to pick up on that.
Can I just come in on that a second?
Councillor Ashley's just raised some of the points that I was going to raise in terms of the dependency. No, don't apologise. Dependency on one person. How we cope when he's out of the office, and the officers themselves did mention. I raised the point, can we do more in terms of collaborative working? Whether that is through, with the likes of Bronavon and Melin, or whether that is with neighbouring authorities. I mean, I know they mentioned, we're ahead of Monmouthshire in terms of the fact we've done the survey now, and Monmouthshire haven't done a survey, but that doesn't mean to say that Monmouthshire might have a dependency on one person. They might have more resources available, and can there be, can we do more to explore the possibility of collaborative working, both with neighbouring authorities and perhaps through the RSLs as well?
Can I come in on?
Yeah.
If I can just come in there. So I've got the criteria down, and I've picked up the capacity issue.
Yeah.
Two of the things that they did mention on the same subject was that there is scope for working with Bronavon, and they're working with them at the moment to try and look at how they can share some of the roles. They have got the opportunity to train up operatives on tree assessments. Yeah. There's more qualifications available, which they're exploring. So for the 4 people who work under Phil, even though they still won't be in the position to make that final decision that they can assist him by going out and assessing. And they've also said that they're doing some work with Bronavon to introduce a one-stop shop so that relevant calls come in are directed to the right places. They did say it would take time, but they are looking at that. But I've got down the bit on criteria, and then capacity is a cause for concern. Are there contingency plans, and to explore further collaboration with other authorities or RSLs, or provide more training. I think that covers the whole thing then, doesn't it?
I particularly like the idea of this one-stop shop, which would pick up your point here with the RSL. Yeah. So, as they've raised it, should we encourage them to adopt?
I want to go one step. I want to go one step further. We need one point of contact, right, where any issue with a tree, whether it be enforcement or doing something about it, it should be just one point, like we got with Linda Ash.
That's what we're looking to do.
Yeah, any issue, enforcement, problems with it, and even with private ones. So we don't have to go gadding around all over the place.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I think it's not a Linda Ash for trees.
No. So if let's make we'll make the point in the recommendation about a one-stop shop.
One-stop stop for everything concerning the trees.
Yeah.
Issues for trees.
Okay.
And advice.
Yeah. Kath, we've got that, haven't we?
You don't have to be Phil either.
Okay, if we move on to the next one, 8.2 was the tree replacement policy. And again, I'm going to call on Kath because she's been making the note and it'll help the discussion.
You all pretty much agreed that there should be a tree replacement policy. Some of the comments that I've written down was, are there ways of exploring funding options through grants? So what you were saying was, agree with the replacement tree policy and explore funding options through various sources. By putting this strategy together, that can help to do that. I've got that down. And then we also talked about targets, which Councillor Bevan brought up. And it was saying, if a target is to be set, then it needs to be appropriate for the particular area, and also in this financial climate needs to be considered. A ratio based on the size of the tree that's felled, for a balanced approach needed to be taken. So, I think they're also of the view that they would love to have a tree policy, but a tree replacement policy, but we need to have a balanced approach to it. So I think overall we can just say that we agree with that and agree that it has to be balanced.
Norma?
I know we're talking about planning guidance later on, but I think it would be good to put it in this tree replacement. You know, if there are planning developments and the trees have to be removed, then those trees should be replaced by the developer, in another spot, obviously. You know what I mean? To keep the same number of trees in the area.
Could I also say that if place plans come into existence, which is something the community councils are looking at and the LDPs would have to relate to, that they become part of the targeted thing there. Okay. Yeah?
I think we should take it one step further. We should adopt the same approach that Wrexham have, that we actually have a stated policy that two trees be planted for loss of every one, and I think we also need wording in there to redress this loss of the tree coverage that we've already experienced, this 1.2%, in that we have a firm target of planting however many new trees each year on suitable sites. So we have a finite target which is measurable. So I think, and in terms of funding, for planting of new trees. Perhaps more, as I said, more usage could be made of the probationary service and the young offenders for the planting. But can also, Kath, they look at the possibility, would, something I just thought of when I went out on the comfort break, is there the possibility for us as elected members to be able to support a new tree planting scheme through our small schemes allowance? Would we be able to utilise some of that towards offsetting the cost of purchasing trees for planting in a particular area, for example?
They wouldn't want to be tied down to that, and the problem you got is it wouldn't be enough. Whereas there are schemes like the Woodland Trust, which we could look at, and I talked about the fact I'm chair of project with landfill tax. That would probably be more appropriate. I don't think our small schemes money is enough. Yeah, we'll try and be down.
Regarding small schemes, I think that should be up to the individual members. I don't think you can make that a policy. That is a choice of each member.
Yeah, no. I'm sorry if I didn't. I'm not saying that. Member. But the other point was Stuart. Could be brought in and used as a funding towards the replanting. Now, he said there's a number of product areas that we could look at, and he'd already identified a couple earlier on. And I know when we've been on this committee before, we've spoken about possibility, for example, of selling bark chippings and things like that as or kindling as a means of trying to derive some extra income. And I think we should stress that these other revenue streams, avenues, these be explored as well.
I'm grateful for all these comments. They seem to be fairly wide-ranging. So, Kath, what have you got now in terms of that?
Well,
I'm just trying to pin this down to...
Hugh specific. If we start with like for like, that's achievable. If you go for 2 for 1, it might not be. I think like for like might be.
Yeah. Sure. The concern I had was it doesn't redress the balance of the trees we've already lost.
I think what Councillor Parish has mentioned is very important, and it's something I was talking about before we restarted. With these new housing developments where we're losing green space and it's very important that we try and pin down the developers and encourage them to do urban tree planting within these new estates. I think it's vital, so we regain some sort of green back within our borough.
On that point, Chair, perhaps Section 106 money could be used, or still to go towards planting of trees.
And said we can't demand. We can make an objective thing like Hugh suggested with the Wrexham experience.
I think. Yeah. I mean, I'm just trying to be fair to everyone here. I'd be tempted to go along what Hugh was suggesting, the Wrexham policy. Well, we can ask them if that's an aim, and I'd also like to pick up what you've suggested about an urban tree for new developments, because that raises lots of constituents raise concerns about those issues. If we pick up those 2 themes and this whole issue about resource, I mean, I'm pretty sure the answer we'll get won't be that positive, but I think we should raise it.
But again, with housing development, the money is not coming. We're not having to deal with that. We can put that onus onto the housing developers, and we encourage those housing developers to put the green space, green back into these new developments.
Should we just do the 2 things then? We'll pick up on Hugh's point about the 2 for 1, and we'll pick up on the urban development. I mean,
urban tree planting for new developments.
It's all warm, touchy-feely stuff.
Yeah, but it's given them, you know, yes, we agree with the tree replacement policy, and this is some of the things we'd like to see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's good.
Okay. Right.
Are we still going to include for them to look into funding options? Because it doesn't necessarily mean we have to bring section 106 or
we can put. We can.
but just say to them.
We can look at funding, appropriate funding opportunities.
Yeah, but if you're encouraging housing developers to focus on urban tree planting, then, you know.
If I can come in there, perhaps I wasn't clear then. From what I've taken down, I got 4 points, which I think we can merge into two, from what you've said. Right.
Kath, just to answer your question, I think we should have something in there about the funding, because the officers raised that as a barrier, didn't they? They said, in an ideal, yes, we'd love to be able to do this, but given we've got funding constraints and budgetary constraints, they felt that was a barrier to preventing them from doing basically what we were recommending as a committee. So I think, yes, there should be an aspect in there to address the funding, to remove that obstacle, to remove that barrier.
Right, so what I've got down is that you overwhelmingly agree to the replacement policy. Can they explore, bearing in mind now we're only talking about a replacement policy, we haven't gone into local development yet, right? So we're just talking about us as a council, explore funding options. We don't have to go any wider than that, we don't have to specify small schemes or any other scheme. Explore funding, that can be external grants, it can be any number of things because we're not specifying. That's point one. Then we go on to the new housing developments. So for any new housing developments coming on board, any trees felled to be replaced by the developer in an urban setting. The only thing I'll pick up on that is something that you just said about them planting on the sites. Something Steve picked up on was that in the past we've tried to encourage that, but it's not always the right aspect because that site might not be right to plant trees too close to the properties, etc. So we may not specify that they have to plant trees in that particular development site, but somewhere that is suitable to have them. Would that be more of a... So then they wouldn't automatically have to put them on the site they're building on, but it might be somewhere that's desperate for flood defence or whatever that needs new trees put on, and it would be more beneficial for that aspect.
Suitable replacement.
Suitable.
The language on the development side, or if not appropriate, then on a suitable alternative site.
There's the point that Steve made, I think he used the word desirability, that the tree's got in the right place. And
we've come across that site down in Two Locks, it was, where they didn't want the tree. Did that? They wanted that, and they put a fence up instead. And I thought that was really quite bad. I mean, whereas they could have put a hedge to that, and they've got the same amount of biomass in there. You see, so that there are more than one way to skin a rat when it comes to stuff like that.
We've come up with a reasonable compromise.
That sounds reasonable.
All right.
And then to finish off on that one, there's obviously also the target setting. So do you agree to take the approach of Wrexham that for every one felled tree that we plant 2 new?
I think that's a good... If we ask for the Wrexham approach, if they think that's not, they've got to come back and explain why.
I mean, any of this they can come back to.
Yeah.
Okay, so just taking you back to what Steve said, the tree nursery can be as basic as working with schools to plant acorns, planting via polytunnels, also using community groups or allotments, or bringing on community rehabilitation groups, which would reduce the burden on their resources.
Yeah, I think that's really good. What we weren't asking. We were asking for community participation in this, and I think a lot of people, in fact, there's a lot of scope in there for them to be imaginative. And giving people acorns, this is the sort of thing Andrew Neville is absolutely brilliant at.
I think beyond that, we did want them to identify a suitable site as well. For a proposed nursery. It doesn't have to be the large-scale commercial enterprise that he mentioned, but I'm sure we've got council land available. There's fields, even in Lanaravan Manor has got a few spare fields going. The Green Meadow Farm it's still under council ownership at the moment. That could be another option. And there must be plenty of sites that we've got as a council land that could be used for a relatively small scale tree nursery.
Just picking up on what Steve was saying about the schools, I think that's an excellent idea. It's part of educating children in greenery and trees. So I think what he was saying here about pushing it into the schools is a really good idea.
It needs to just develop it to a programme, really, where we could actually take certain acorn. What's it? Trees from acorns. There, it's straight one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Could also we explore the possibility of working with partners, other partners in this? I know, Stuart, you mentioned a few earlier on already, didn't you? Not just the allotments. And
I was talking to the new ward gardeners. There's the growing space, which is a charity based up in Upper Cumbrian. There's about 5 or 6 suitable horticultural partners.
We won't be specific about the partners, but we'll look for community. Yeah, we'll use community. But yeah, Kath, there's quite a lot there. Have you got that?
Yeah.
Let's move on to
the other one, Chair. Sorry, very quickly, which unfortunately we seem to miss that question when we went through the list of questions, was the plant scheme, where they wanted a tree planted for every child that was born or adopted in Wales. And we unfortunately we missed that particular question, I think.
It did come up. Stuart raised it.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, it did come up.
It seems like we're planting for people that are born and planting for people that...
Yeah. Are we going to ask a question about that?
I was going to say, but the thing we didn't seem to pick up in discussions then, but I made a note of in the same context, was the sponsor tree and the memorial trees. And I know that
well, let's raise the two issues. What scope is there for the memorial tree? Because in answer to your question about the memorial tree, the officer said it's a good idea. The only thing they were concerned about the future management,
ongoing cost of maintenance.
Yeah. So, but that doesn't preclude us as a committee from putting that down as for consideration.
Rubbish discussion.
Well, yeah. So I think we will ask those two questions combined. Got them, Kath?
Yeah.
Just on that point, Chair. There could be opportunities for small scale tree planting within cemeteries. I'm not saying take up all the space that's allocated for graves, but around the peripheries, if you're looking at a sort of memorial.
The Newcombe Brand cemetery's got a green area anyway, planting trees. So that is something that's in there already.
Yeah.
Thinking about the ongoing maintenance, because obviously you've already employed a grounds person to look after the grounds there already, aren't you? So.
My mic on.
And sorry, and well, I've just thought of it. The other obvious one would be parks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I said that already.
Okay. Sorry. The availability of council land for connective tree planting schemes. We didn't come up with anything on this. We had an explanation about the green infrastructure and assessment methodology, and we agreed it would be a good idea. Right. So I don't think we need to put a recommendation down on that one. The next one was protected species awareness sessions. What did we come up with on that, please?
Sorry, what page are we on?
We originally talked about whether or not we could open up the training to RSLs and sports groups, and I think really the only thing that Steve said with that is that he's at the end of the phone and will provide any advice that anybody wants, but the training is more about the legal aspect, which needs to be more for staff than other people.
And we picked up on, Kath, we picked up on the training aspect when we looked at the sports stuff later. So I suggest we don't make a recommendation here, we'll pick it up in a minute.
Yeah.
28.6, supplementary planning guidance, landscape buffer strips.
On here I've got a recommendation to write to Lyndon Puddy asking him to liaise with our PSB partners, asking them to sign up to this strategy when it's complete.
And I thought that was particularly important. I mean, Hugh, you raised the RSL. That is a big lever for us in terms of getting after the statutory partners on the Public Service Board, and the Wellbeing Plan is currently out for consultation. The only other issue that came up in the context of that discussion was the wider context, Stuart, that you raised about railways, health authorities are on the Public Service Board, highways, government.
We're not clear about that.
So we could ask Kath, is there any scope to involve? Is there any scope to involve? I mean, I'm not so sure if we can involve the Welsh Government.
Yeah, they're the owners of that.
We can ask the question.
Highway Authority.
Yeah, all right. Well, Highway Authority and the rail.
That's Mr. Puddy.
We can ask. Is there any scope to engage with those wider organisations?
There might be more out there when they look.
Can I Chair? Just thank you again. Just looking at the wording on the report, and I think this ties in with what my colleagues over there have said on planning, an increased awareness of the value of green infrastructure has highlighted a gap in planning guidance that an updated tree strategy should seek, where possible, to resolve. Basically, what we're saying is that at the moment there is this gap in the planning process, and more needs to be done to encourage the planning committee to factor in open spaces, tree planting, parks, and that in future developments going forward. Because I know that the developers want to put as many houses as they can as possible on a particular plot of land to maximise profits and what have you. But we don't have anything, I don't think, in planning policy documents that stipulates that there's got to be a certain amount of green space or a certain amount of trees planted.
Come back in, and Norma obviously is our expert on this. She's the chair of... No, she's chair of the planning. But it did come up, Norma, it did come up in the discussion about supplementary planning guidance. So should we be, the ask be, we recommend there should be supplementary planning guidance developed.
Thank you.
I mean, it would have to be planning guidance. Because it's too late when it comes to committee, because the planning application is then complete. The planning officers have to work with the applicant long before it comes to committee. So we'll have to go down, the planning guidance.
So we're asking for supplementary planning guidance is a recommendation. Yeah, and that came up. It might not be in this particular part of it, but it definitely came up.
Two recommendations.
The next one, actually. It's the next item, actually, that comes up.
Well, we might want to put it under there in the appropriate place. So, can I just be clear now, Kath, what we're going to put on this one?
So we're on point 6, aren't we?
Yes. We're going to put the supplementary planning guidance under the next one.
But 8.6 is supplementary planning guidance, and that's where we are.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yes, you're right, it's 8.6, you have to say that's it.
Okay, right, so write to Lyndon Puddy to ask all members of the PSB to sign up to it, and is there any scope to engage with Welsh Government or Network Rail for the areas that
The
run
Highways
through?
Agency.
So it's not Welsh
No,
Government.
Highways Agency, we said.
Highways agency, yeah, they are one of the agencies.
I know. We may be able to get away with it because they may be slightly different legal entity.
They are, yes, they're an authority in its own right. I found a few more, actually.
No, it's fine. And then,
And then also that supplementary planning guidance is required for that one.
yeah,
Chairman, we can agree with it, though, can't we? Yeah.
Mike on it. 8.8 Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. Cross-department collaboration. We've already made a recommendation on this, haven't we?
But I think on that last one, Chair, 8.7, it actually says in the report there is a requirement to produce a plan setting out how the local authority intends to implement the duty. So there's a statutory requirement on us on that. So perhaps it's worth noting that in the report, highlighting the fact that there's a statutory duty on us. We're not making any further recommendations on that, which is it's obvious we have to have one.
Wellbeing plan is being developed currently by the Public Service Board.
I've got one from National Resources Wales, which he referred to before, and he did put it into his recommendations.
Yeah, we'll pick it. Let's just.
Okay.
We'll pick it up. Don't worry. 8.8, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. The discussion point on that one was.
Two on it.
Yeah, should the updated tree strategy clearly demonstrate the contribution to the goals of the Wellbeing of Future Generation Wales Act? We clearly agree with that because we're asking all the Public Service Board members to sign up to the tree policy.
So that's where I've got this one to go with.
Yeah, so no,
If Bill's made us an offer, we really ought to note it in there.
Yeah, and Natural Resources Wales already said to us in committee that they would sign up.
But he said two things there
Go on.
which we need to note. Right, one was about riparian owners. That's a big issue for us. The trees floating down the river.
Yeah.
Yeah, said he'd go and look into that. That needs to be noted in recommendations.
Yeah, well, I agree, but I don't think it fits here.
Where does it fit?
I think we'll have either at the start or the end. We'll have some general ones.
Okay, can I do that? Put that on the end for a minute.
Yeah, let's do that.
And then okay, all right.
Discussion
Okay.
points, and then anything you think we've missed or any member, we'll catch any of them at the end, Kath. All right.
Okay.
So on the first one now, the first one, key discussion point 1 on 8.8.
Everybody signs up.
We all signed up to that. We've already asked the question, so I think we don't need to make a further recommendation there.
But then we've got a few of them bang at it.
And should the updated tree strategy apply to all public service organisations in line with, and we've said yes to that, and we're specifically asking that question earlier.
Okay.
In fact, you can almost take the wording. You can almost take the wording from discussion point 1 and discussion point 2 to be the recommendations. Just say, instead of saying should an updated tall vine tree strategy, should say the tall vine tree strategy should clearly demonstrate its contribution to the goals of the wellbeing of future generation.
Well, the positive
and that's the actual recommendation.
It's the one that we asked before. We knew the size of ours and Bronavon's estate. I would like to know the size of their estates, which is the number of trees they got basically, and what state they're in. It's a very simple little question. It's a nasty one too. I know Bronavon's number of trees. Bronavon's got 5,000.
Hang on a sec. Let me continue, Mike.
Sorry.
When we did this tree survey, wouldn't that have picked up all the trees in Torvine?
No.
So how do we know then that we've got 23% coverage in Torvine Borough if you don't count the health board's anyone's trees? I mean, it doesn't make sense to me.
It doesn't, does it?
No. So I think they have counted all the trees.
I'd like to know a breakdown of what all those trees, how many trees each has got.
That's not a recommendation.
It is, if you want to take it.
And what
Did you ask for that during the meeting, though? What were you asking? I'm lost.
No,
sorry.
I wasn't sure about where we were going to get that from, but it would be useful to ask the partnership, local partnership board, about a breakdown of their trees and what state we're in. It's not an unreasonable question.
And what are we going to do with the date there? I'm just
if
asking.
we're going to go joint work, if we're going from a known, that's like Donald Rumsfeld country, doesn't it? If we know what the state of our own trees are, and we know what the state of Bronavon's are, we can look at the rest of the state, because we've still got this question. No, you've just raised a question which I didn't even think about when I was going through there, to be quite honest. It's a really interesting one. We talked about that 1.6 trees not good, and if we want to raise the state of every tree there, I don't know what the health of those trees are, do you?
What we can ask, and then if,
it starts to get interesting.
Well, what we can ask is, in terms of the Public Service Board members, what data is available on their stock, tree stock?
Simple as that.
We'll keep it to that. But yeah, because if they're going to sign up to the tree policy, they would need to know that, wouldn't they? Well, we can ask that. We can ask that.
Yeah.
I don't know how we're going to word that, Kath, but I mean, we're already going to write to Linden under an earlier recommendation about we want all the Public Service Board members to sign up.
Yeah.
We're going to put that in as a recommendation to the drafting of this wellbeing plan.
Honestly, I don't know where National Resources Wales pulled that data from.
I don't know. Right. Okay. Let's move on. 8.9: a fresh strategic approach to the protection and enhancement of trees. And we agreed with this. Should work commence on a yes? I don't think we need to make a specific recommendation on that.
Chair, I think if we're all in agreed, then yes, the recommendation should include the themes as well, that are listed on the top of page 38, because they were already outlined there. So to include those in the recommendation that we made. Well, they're listed on the top of 38. Vision, theme 1, community, place and heritage, to include those.
The only point just picking up on Stuart's point, should we say council and partners trees?
Yeah.
Just to pick up we're asking for data on trees.
Yeah.
Should we, we agree with the vision, but should it be we want to scope the whole thing here, don't we?
Yeah. So include the RSLs, you mean?
Yeah. Well, I'm using the term partner, so we can capture ourselves plus Natural Resources Wales plus wherever else.
Right.
Most of them don't belong to us in the social housing.
Now the next one, we did have some concerns around the tree management guidance on leased grounds. Kath, do you want to refresh us?
Yeah.
Sorry, Kath's doing all the work here. I'll just let Kath finish her sentence.
I found it. What I've written down, based on comments that came up, was a consistent approach should be in place for those groups taking on the leases of sports grounds, so they all have access to the guidance they require going forward. Now, that was in relation to explore the best way of providing tree management guidance to sports clubs on leased land. Yeah, we agree that there should be, but it should be consistent so that they've all got access to it. Some of the other issues then that you all picked up was about the cost and things, which is a policy decision that's already been taken by the council, and when they've taken on those leases, they've taken it on knowing that they would be financially responsible. Is that my understanding? But I don't know what the recommendation is.
I can assure you that most of these sports groups did not realise they had to maintain the trees. They knew they had to maintain their pitches, and they were prepared to do that. But when it comes to the trees, they just haven't got the money to do it.
Yeah.
And I don't want to see these sports groups folding, because if we are looking at the Future Generations Act, it's important that we encourage these sports, especially the juniors.
Yeah.
I'm not saying we shouldn't be supporting, the adults, but I think it's really important. And they just didn't realise that they'd have to maintain the trees. And it's a huge financial burden on them, and I can't see some of them coping with it. Well, the majority of them, they will not cope with it. And it's something we need to bring up, because I think Torvine should have realised this in the first place.
I
agree.
Well, as I keep saying, it's not just sports grounds, it's allotments,
Yeah, I
it
agree.
is community halls,
Yeah.
because as I keep saying, Mount Pleasant Hall's got a load of trees around it, which we're responsible for. We've got cracked willows down the side of the canal. We have to do those. I suspect the one your mother runs got trees around it as well. And it's a lot more than if you just say sports things, it gets them off the hook. Now, we were advised by...
No.
We'll listen.
Yeah.
I think that... Can I turn your mic off and I'll put mine on?
Yeah.
I think there's strong feelings here that we need to make a point about...
Can I just say what the answer is?
Yeah, no, let me know. I'm in now, so I can have my say.
No, you've all got views on it.
I know, yeah. No, all I'm going to suggest, listening to what you're all saying, is we don't use the term sport.
Outside bodies.
Yeah, or small community organisations.
I've just
With
written down
these
community,
grounds.
community clubs or groups who are responsible for
Clubs and groups, Stuart.
There's 44 allotments.
Well, aren't they classed as a club?
No, we're allotments. They are separate grouping.
Right, clubs, groups, and allotments.
Yeah, like that.
Right, we want to just we're trying to capture everything here.
You saw
And who?
it was.
Sorry, go on, who?
I think the point that Norma was making was that these clubs took on leases. In terms of PDSC, they were told, take it or leave it. It comes as a package. You want the sports ground, you are now responsible for maintaining the trees. They weren't given the option. I know that there was a site survey undertaken on the trees in Pontier, because I was there. I attended it myself when Phil Grimes and Steve Horseman came along. Not all the sports grounds had the trees assessed. Now, when Duncan was here before he retired, he did say to us in an earlier committee meeting, we, as part of this survey that was undertaken when they employed these two contractors to go around the entire stock of the trees and compile this new database that we've got, Duncan did give a commitment earlier on that yes, they would it would include the least, I won't call them sports pitches, but the least grounds, and they would be included. Now, the officer said she didn't know whether that had been done or not, and she was going to go away and check and find out. So I think that's important to find out whether that was undertaken, because I don't think all the sports clubs were willing to sign the new lease anyway, because they had concerns. So we're now in a position where some did and some didn't. So it was basically about the inconsistencies and the consistencies of the approach. But the point then that Stuart was making was, are we missing a trick here as a council in that we can have a product offering to say we can hire our services out to some of these sports grounds to undertake the remedial works on the trees, and there's another source of potential revenue for us.
One of my problems is you've got people hiring in people considerably cheaper than the council, and the council's almost doing it because they're saying we do it at this price. And you've got the kind of trade going on. It's the same grounds maintenance as well. The problem is they're prepared to go with that. That is one problem. The other thing is that some people are doing DIY hedge maintenance, and we're okay doing that on allotments, for instance. That's a worry if it's done properly and it's okay. I mean, allotmenters have got a lot of kit. We can do stuff like that, but then you've got to make sure that people have got the right equipment and they're qualified to do that. That's one issue. The other thing is we need a consistent policy as a council, putting my other hat on as chair of allotments for the whole lot, that everybody has signed up to the same thing. You've been in those meetings where we've had those rows about things like that, and that we don't get into argy-bargy about this massive brick trees coming over there, who belongs to it, and it's an argument of riparian owners and things like that. We, from a safety point of view, because what happens is you go for a year or so, and the tree's not dealt with. So, and the same with sports pitches. I got several of those sports pitches. So we need a consistent policy which says that somebody's going to deal with it.
Let's go back a step back a second.
Yeah.
Right. The key discussion point was explore the best way of providing tree management guidance to sport clubs, etc. Now, the etc. would cover allotments and other on leased land.
Yeah.
Now, the issue that's been raised is, and okay, it's been done in the past, but some small, particularly sports organisations, took on these legal commitments, as he was pointed out, and in some areas there was a proper risk assessment done, in others there weren't, and the affordability now is unsustainable. So we're trying to find a form of words where we want the council just to look at, there's an issue there, can they look at it? Now, in the discussion, what I got out from the officers was, we ain't got no money. That was one thing. But what they were saying is they can always ring us up, they can always come for help and support. But we need to come up with a form of words now that captures all our concerns and angst and helps these people if we can. But the likelihood is if we go straight in with a bullish, we want more money, we're going to get a no. I mean, that's the reality. So how do we word this to pick up Norma's point, accept that who has said these people, you know, in your area, you was at the risk assessment. So I'm not sure, Kath, what you've got, but we need to capture all this in a pretty clear and concise.
To come in, the officer did say they would be willing to produce some guidance and publicise that guidance maybe on Dorvine's website. So they did say that they would put some guidance information in place, but it does pick up a number of points, because where Stuart made the point earlier about the so-called DIYers doing maintenance on trees and stuff, what happens if those trees have got TPOs on and you get these unqualified people undertaking the works? It's a can of worms, really. But to go back to what, rather than try and detract from it and look for complicated issues, what they did say, the officers did say, was they were willing to produce guidance on this subject and willing to make that guidance publicly available.
Let's try and simplify this. They should provide some form of written guidance, which would, but the guidance also should cover things like the NRW offer that they've got a grant scheme, for example. So the guidance shouldn't just cover the maintenance, but some sort of signpost into potential financial opportunities.
Yeah. You know,
I mean, I don't think we're going to get much better than that, Norma, in terms of, you know, if we ask them, will they provide a resource, they're going to say no. But, I mean, that guy today said, and I raised it with the officers, we've got little grant schemes about trees. Now, whether that would, you know, I'm just thinking, go on.
It's a matter of scale. You can go out and tackle a 10-foot hedge with the equipment we've got, but you don't go and tackle a 30, 40-foot tree. I mean, you can't do that. I mean, it's out of scale. We've got equipment that does that quite easily. Yeah.
Let's say we ask, and what? Let's say we want written guidance, and what are the options to provide financial support? We ask that, Norma, what are they going to tell us? No, should we ask that question?
I think we need to support these groups more in this. It's not guidance they need. I mean, the officers don't like them cutting the hedge down when it's nesting time, you know, for the bird, and I agree with them. If they want to have control over it, then the council needs to be doing the maintenance of it. And then they wouldn't have these problems. It's as simple as that. Yeah. The council were maintaining them before they had these sports clubs and other groups signing their leases, you know, to maintain the sports pitches, etc. And before that, the council were doing it you know, doing the trees. So I don't see why they had to
we can
put
ask that question.
Yeah.
We can be blunt and we can say we'd like written guidance and we'd also like consideration to be given to providing ongoing,
Even if it's ongoing assistance, isn't it?
well, maintenance we want.
Yeah, well, that's it. isn't it?
Yeah, we want the council.
The council should pay for it. That's the whole point.
I just come in with a point there. The point, one of the points Councillor Brooks made was these people who are in these sports clubs were quite happy to take on the maintenance of their bowling greens or their cricket pitches or their football pitches or rugby pitches, which is where they had the necessary expertise, because in some cases they'd been undertaking maintenance alongside what the council was already doing. Like they might be, say the council visited once every 6 months or to do it, some of these clubs were doing their own degree of maintenance on a quarterly basis, for example. What they didn't have the expertise on is the trees, because they're not I struggle with that word as well, culturalists. Now, the point that Councillor Brooks was making was, how do we know, unless this assessment on the condition of the trees is undertaken, how do we know that we are not handing over a dangerous asset? So we could be saying to the sports clubs, you've got to take on the lease, which includes the maintenance now of the trees. And bearing in mind that some clubs have already, as the Chair said, it's a legally binding document, have already signed the new leases to take on that responsibility. The concern Councillor Brooks had was, how do we know that that tree is perfectly healthy and it's not diseased, dying or infected or is liable to come down? And that was the thing, that there was reassurance to the sports clubs that at the time that they signed the lease, that they were not taking on trees in a precarious state. Now, the council officers have said, oh, we can't go back to it what we were doing before because of the cost. But the thing is, how many clubs actually did go ahead and sign a lease? I don't think there was that many. I think it was a minority of clubs that actually signed the lease, because the majority of them raised issues against, such as Norma said, the costs involved of doing it. They were finding stuff prohibitive. So I don't think there's actually that many organisations that they would have to go back and revisit to undertake a survey on the health assessment of the trees.
We need to try and work it out, don't we?
We want to, yeah.
Because if we get lost,
Yeah, we need.
Work out how many people are doing it. That's a simple solution.
well, no, we just need the right wording. We just need the right wording.
Just need the right wording.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry to keep banging on about this. The point I was trying to make was we need a consistent approach. We need a guidance for those clubs that have signed the lease. We need a guidance for those clubs that haven't yet signed the lease but are probably going to do so going forwards. And whatever we adopt has got to be consistently applied.
No. Yeah, I'm just, Kath. What have we got at the moment? No. We need a form of words here.
Okay, right. So. Okay, so the first thing that we wrote down right at the beginning, before we even started discussing this, during the meeting, was that a consistent approach needed to be in place. And that was written down, that was what we seemed to be saying at that point, okay? Then we had some issues during these discussions about who we're aiming that at. So we've said consistent approach to the guidance that's provided to community clubs, groups and allotments who are now responsible for the leases of whichever piece of land it is. I've then noted down, explore whether the survey carried out in 2016 surveyed the leased land, and if so, are the outcomes of this survey documented on the database? Because I don't think we still know for sure whether all of those pieces of land, but I don't really think that should form part of the recommendation, because that's something you discussed in the meeting that she said she would go away and find for you anyway, which will come back on the action sheet. So I don't think that, I've written it down, but I don't necessarily think it'll weave into the recommendation. And then the chair also added that within this consistent approach to the guidance, it should also signpost to the availability of grant funding.
And, yeah, but Norma felt...
And I appreciate that, but I really don't know what to say for you.
Well, you can say that we've got... You can say that we have concerns because we know that there are groups who can't cope with their tree maintenance.
I can say that, but that isn't a recommendation. So I can put that in the comments
No, well,
section
we can say
and
no.
say that you'd like to...
Well, if we say that, what will the...
Or can you word it so that the officers would assist in helping finding funding for...
they're going to get out of that one.
They're not going to do that.
For this?
No, they're not going to do that. No.
To come up with options to mitigate the problem. I mean, that's broad, and it's not actually saying the word finance.
No.
Can we say that?
Yeah.
I mean, at least we're demonstrating as a committee, we know there's a problem and we're asking for a solution.
Big cross against it.
Is that?
Yeah. What I meant was, I didn't mean that we would find the funding from, but what I meant was that officers would assist these groups and clubs in helping finding funding for them. Not we would find the funding, but we would assist them.
Yeah. But I think if
So
we
they
ask
came to them, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, right, so I've got...
Yeah, no, sorry.
Okay.
Kath will read this now.
So concerns about the financial burdens put on leaseholders, can options be explored to mitigate this issue?
Yeah, okay.
Can I come in?
Yeah.
Can I just confirm, though, are we still saying about the consistent approach to the guidance? Because when we come down to it, the discussion point is explore the best way of providing tree management guidance to sports clubs. So they still need an answer on the guidance thing. So I'm still putting that down about the consistent approach and all the wording we discussed, but then also adding on these extra concerns, yeah?
A small point about the funding. I agree with the chair. If we mention the F word, they're likely to run a mile and say, no, we can't do it. We can't offer them assistance. But just on a practical viewpoint, I know my local clubs ask me for funding, and I know they get funding from the local community council as well. So as long as either you continue to support them through small schemes and they've got access to the community council, then, you know, it should ensure that the clubs are still there going forwards.
Yeah. So, if we ask them to mitigate, that they should come up with those sort of solutions, you know. I mean, and that's not tying us down on the small schemes, but community councils is one avenue, Natural Resources Wales is another, you know, there's a number. So, we're leaving it broad so they can come back with broad, you know, a range of answers. We're not trying to pin them down. Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing as well, Chair, is if the CIL is implemented, then those community councils that are in areas where there is housing development will benefit quite considerably financially going forwards and will have extra money available. They wouldn't solely be reliant upon the precept that they get from Torfaen. They will also have a big pots, some of them will have big pots of money from the CIL that the community councils will then be able to support local organisations because they'll have a bigger pot of money available for grants.
The issue with that is if we take one of the biggest community councils, Cwmbran, presumably Lantana, where there's a lot of housing development going on, they get CIL, but the community council covers a wider area than Lantana. It'll cover Two Locks, Lantana, you know, it's quite wide, isn't it? Fairwater, you know, and those areas aren't having, you know, the community council might decide they're not going to support Lantana, and they might decide, you know, I'm just thinking aloud.
Just to pick up on that, I've actually.
Let's try and
Chair, just to pick up on that, I've raised this at the presentation of the CIL, because at the CIL it was said quite glibly by some of the council officers, oh yes, we can use the money that's raised in the south of the borough to support the north of the borough. And the point that I brought up was, if this, well, the development, the hospital development is going ahead now in Lanfrancford Grange Specialist Critical Care Centre, but if the housing goes ahead there, the 350, 400 houses that's in the LDP, bizarrely, it's not the Pontier Community Council that would get that big chunk of money, because their boundary just finishes just shy of the hospital. It would actually be Cwmbran and Crossy-Caeliog Community Council that would inherit that big chunk of money. So it does open issues in terms of where that money is spent, because the money from the development in Lanfrancford could actually end up being spent in Crossy-Caeliog.
I agree with that, but I don't think the CIL is for this discussion. Right, so...
No, I was going to say that, Chairman. We cannot tell the community councils how to spend their money. We are way out of order.
All we're asking is our council to come up with options for mitigation with this funding problem, which is, we're keeping it broad. We're not making trying to do things we know we can't do. I think we're nearly finished. We've done that one. The last one was consultation with the public, and we were, yes, please, get on with it. So,
but you want him to bring back the responses?
General points for the NRW. One was the what do they call it? The rights riparian things with NRW, especially where things border on the river, and that nonsense with trees going up. You heard what Bill said, don't you? We need to remind him that he was going to take that back.
We'll put that in the action sheet.
Put that in the action sheet. And then the other one, which I was rather pleased to hear, was that they were quite happy to lend a hand to council when it came to research and information, because they've got a lot more resources in this department than we have.
Okay, can we just note that in the it won't be a recommendation, that'll be a note.
Yeah, because that's the sort of stuff that you get.
It's on the record then. And
hopefully I was very pleased to hear him say that, because I know they've got a lot of stuff.
So what I was going to say, the last one, 11, consultation with stakeholders and the wider public. Stakeholders are very important to consult with, and that's all the people who have leases.
Sure, they consult.
There was one other point I wanted to raise, which was the product, if you like. If we've got a tree policy, that we actually use what comes out there with it from the, things like natural products that can come out of using the woods. You picked up on this as well, didn't you? Or have done in the past. Things like hurdle, like sticks and stuff, because the woods actually should be used, and this is something that the community, our local community woods have been good at, and we should be using the council and Bronavon land for that. It's a policy that Steve's done in the past, where we've done the planting and growing regime using public land, for the benefit of the community. So, community business or community use of it is a really good strategy. It's something the council has supported in the past. Can you make a note of that? Yeah.
I think with consultation with stakeholders, we should include the PSB in that to pick up Natural Resources Wales. And for the 9.0 issue summary, where it's listing all the following key issues which have been introduced, totally agree with everything that's listed, number 1 through 11. I think perhaps we could have a number 12, a new planting programme to address the 1.2% decline over the 4-year period from 2009 to 2013. And then point number 13 is the point that Councillor Ashley's made, explore new revenue opportunities.
Can I just come in there?
Through use of forestry, woodland.
I think could we the replanting policy, wouldn't that be covered under tree replacement policy? Couldn't we put a bracket there? You know,
I thought that as well, Chair, but when I looked at it again, I read that to be replacing one tree for one that's cut down. And what we were proposing, it was not just to replace one being cut down with 2 new trees, but we also want an additional new planting programme as well. So where it said tree replacement policy, I read that to replace where one's cut down.
Yeah.
It's expanding.
Yeah, except we've recommended that we're going to adopt, or we're going to look at the Wrexham model, aren't we?
Yeah.
We've already recommended that.
Yeah, but if we're listing, sorry,
Go on,
if we were listing all the points there, look, I've already said yes, I agree with everything from 1 through 11. Can we add a new 12 and 13 to the bottom of the recommendations on page, 38, on 9.0 issue summary?
Okay, we can ask them whether they come back and tell. We can certainly ask you.
Yeah, thank you.
It's all right, Kath, we will ask.
Yeah.
And see what they say. Any other issues? No. Okay, I haven't had enough. No. Okay. Can I just remind members now that the date of the next meeting is on the Wednesday, the 14th of February, and the topic will be recycling, helping develop Torfaen's strategy to ensure delivery of the statutory recycling targets of 64% by 2019-20 and 70% for 2024-25 are achieved. Can I thank members, I know the officers are gone, and invite you to attending and contributing to the meeting. I'd particularly like to thank Rachel and Kath, and poor old Kath was typing up notes over lunchtime today. So, and Rachel's been making copious notes. So, as usual, we're very grateful to the support we get from officers for this committee. So, I'd like to finish by closing the meeting to the press and the public and thanking you all.